Tonight, a bell long silent begins to toll again, not in sound, but in memory. In the candlelit halls of old kingdoms, a forgotten law stirs beneath dust and parchment, threatening to unravel bloodlines that have ruled for centuries. What if a single sentence, inked by a dead king, could decide who is noble and who must fall? Before we begin, take a moment to gently support this channel. Like the story if it helps you unwind. Subscribe for more slow, sleep-friendly tales, and comment to tell us where you're listening from. Perhaps late evening in the US, early morning calm in Europe, a quiet night in Canada, or another corner of the world. At whatever peaceful hour has found you here, settle in now, dim the lights, loosen your breath, and let the day drift away as we return to the hush of the past, where ink remembers what people try to forget. The law slept in a chest of oak and iron, wrapped in cloth the color of old wheat. It lay beneath a tower whose stones had learned the language of storms, where rain spoke softly and moss listened. No one visited the chest anymore, not the scribes who once argued over commas, not the lords who preferred their histories polished and simple. Time, it seemed, had agreed to keep the secret. Yet time is a patient keeper, with a habit of returning what is borrowed. On a morning washed pale by fog, the tower's keeper, an elderly woman named Merrow, felt a chill move through her hands as she dusted the room. The chill did not come from the stone. It came from the thought that she was being remembered. She paused, breathing slowly, the way she had learned to do after many winters, and looked at the chest. Its lock bore a crest no longer flown, a crown split by a river. Moreau had not opened it in years. When she did, the hinge sighed like a sleeper turning in bed. Inside, the law-weighted parchment, thick as bark, ink-browned but steadfast. The words were careful, deliberate, and dangerous in their calm. They spoke of lineage not as inheritance alone, but as responsibility, of titles not as gifts, but as tests renewed each generation. They named a condition long ignored, a measure that, if applied, would redraw the map of honor. Merrow read slowly, letting each sentence settle like snow. Outside, the fog thinned, revealing banners along the city walls. She thought of the families behind those banners, the feasts, the marriages, the quiet fears whispered at night. The law did not shout, it did not accuse, it simply waited to be acknowledged. By noon, the bells rang not in alarm, but routine. Still, something had shifted. A messenger would come. A council would gather. And noble names, once spoken like prayers, would be weighed like stones. Merrow closed the chest with care, as one tucks in a child who has begun to dream. The council chamber breathed differently that afternoon. Sunlight slid through tall windows in long, quiet bands, catching dust motes that drifted like unhurried thoughts. The walls were lined with portraits, faces painted to look confident, enduring, certain of their place. Yet the room itself seemed to listen, as if it knew those assurances were temporary. Messengers arrived one by one, their boots softened by the rugs, their voices lowered without being told. News moved in murmurs along the gallery. A document found, a seal recognized, a law older than the hall itself. Each whisper brushed past the portraits, and the painted eyes appeared to follow it, unsettled. Lord Halver stood near the eastern window, hands folded behind his back. He was a man practiced in stillness. He had learned long ago that patience could feel like wisdom to those watching. As the words reached him, his breath slowed further, not in calm, but in calculation. His family's claim was ancient, yes, but ancient claims were often stitched together with convenient forgetting. Across the chamber, Lady Serene traced the carved edge of the council table with one finger. The wood was warm from the sun. She focused on that warmth, grounding herself as her thoughts tried to run ahead. Her grandmother had once spoken of a vow unfulfilled, a clause dismissed as ceremonial. Serene had laughed then. Now she wondered why the memory had returned uninvited. The doors opened at last, and the Keeper Mero was announced not with ceremony, but with respect that had grown quietly over decades. She entered carrying a wrapped bundle, her steps measured, her face composed. The room leaned toward her without moving. Even the air seemed to pause. When she placed the parchment on the table, no one touched it. Not yet. The silence deepened, gentle but heavy, like snow on branches. Outside, a breeze moved through the city, lifting banners in a slow, uncertain rhythm. Moreau spoke simply. She named the law. She named its age. She did not name its consequences. That task belonged to those who would read, interpret, and perhaps be changed by it. As the council prepared to begin, each noble felt the same quiet realization settle within them. Whatever this law decided, it would not hurry. It would unfold slowly, deliberately, and there would be time. Too much. The first reader was chosen by habit rather than courage. Master Elion, oldest among the scribes, adjusted his lenses and drew the parchment closer. His hands trembled only slightly, the way leaves do when the wind is still deciding. He read aloud in a voice worn smooth by years of decrees and treaties, letting each word rest before moving on. The law spoke of names, how they were granted, carried, and, in rare cases, withdrawn. It described a lineage as a river, not a pillar, flowing, fed by many sources, altered by neglect or care. Titles, it said, must be renewed by deed as well as birth, or else they returned to the realm, to be held in trust. No one interrupted. Even those who felt safe listened closely, as though careful attention might count as virtue. Lord Halvar's thoughts moved backward through generations. He pictured a great uncle who had avoided a winter levy, a cousin who had ruled by proxy while traveling abroad. Minor lapses they had been called. The law did not use that phrase. It used intervals of absence. The distinction felt colder. Lady Serene closed her eyes briefly. She remembered her grandmother's hands, strong, kind, impatient with ceremony. Promises are heavier than crowns, she had said once. Serene had not understood then. She felt the meaning now, settling gently but firmly in her chest. As Elion continued, the chamber grew warmer. Sunlight shifted, touching the faces in the portraits differently, as if reassessing them. A servant brought water, and the clink of glass sounded loud in the hush. Somewhere beyond the walls, a cart passed, wheels humming on stone, life continuing without pause. When the reading reached the clause of review, a soft exhale moved through the room. The law required a measured reckoning. No sudden stripping of titles, no public shaming. Each family would be examined in turn, their histories unfolded like quilts, stitches counted, gaps noted. It would take years. Time again was the law's truest ally. Elian finished and folded the parchment with care. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the nobles felt the weight of their names shift, not falling away. Not yet, but asking to be held differently. By evening, the news had slipped beyond the council walls, as news always does, softly, unevenly, carried on errands and glances. It reached the kitchens first, then the markets, then the narrow stairwells, where neighbors paused mid-sentence to listen. No proclamations were made, yet the city sensed a change, like a tide turning far out to sea. Lanterns were lit earlier than usual. Their glow pooled along the streets, steady and patient. Bakers closed their shutters with extra care. A watchman leaned longer on his spear, listening to the echo of his own breathing. The city did not panic. It waited. In a modest house near the river, a young clerk named Tomas unfolded a scrap of paper where his family tree was sketched in careful ink. He had drawn it as an exercise, nothing more. Now he studied it with new eyes, tracing lines that led not upward, but outward towards service, toward small acts that had never been recorded. He felt, for the first time, that those acts might matter. High on the hill, Lord Halvard dined alone. The food tasted the same, but his attention did not rest on it. He considered what could be gathered, what could be proven, what might be reclaimed. The law allowed for testimony, for witnesses long overlooked. It also allowed for silence. He wondered which would serve him best. Lady Serene walked the length of her family's gallery, stopping before a faded tapestry that showed an ancestor mending a bridge after a flood. No crown, no armor, just work. She smiled softly, a calm she did not expect settling over her. Whatever came, she thought, there was ground here to stand on. As night deepened, the bells rang the hour. Their sound moved through stone and sleep alike, unhurried, reassuring. The forgotten law had returned, yes, but it had not come to shatter. It had come to remind and reminders, when given time, can be gentle teachers. The city breathed in, slow and steady, and let the darkness hold it. Morning arrived quietly, as if unwilling to intrude. A thin mist lingered in the streets while the archives stirred awake. Keys turned in locks that had not been tested in years, and doors yielded with polite reluctance. Inside, shelves rose like orderly forests, their spines labeled in careful hands, long gone. Master Elion returned with 2 junior scribes, their steps light, their eyes wide. They began with the oldest families, not out of favor, but necessity. Age left more to examine. Scrolls were laid out on broad tables, weighted at the corners, their edges curled like resting leaves. Ink varied in shade and confidence and bold, some tentative, each mark a decision once made. The process was unhurried by design. Elion taught the scribes to read for what was missing as much as what was present. The winters without record, the years when a lord's seal appeared, rarely or not at all. Absence, he reminded them gently, is a kind of presence. Elsewhere, Lady Serene sent 4 letters-old correspondences kept in cedar chests, smelling faintly of resin and smoke. She read them slowly, savoring the voices of the past. There were apologies written too late, offers made quietly, help given without audience. She marked each with a ribbon, not for defense, but for memory. Lord Halvard, meanwhile, summoned witnesses, retainers who had served faithfully, stewards who knew how to speak without saying too much. He practiced gratitude in measured doses, listening as they rehearsed shared histories. It felt like arranging furniture before a storm, useful perhaps, but not comforting. By midday, sunlight warmed the archive windows, and dust motes danced again. The scribes paused for tea, steam rising in gentle curls. No verdicts were drawn, no judgments made, only the steady, calming work of looking closely. And in that closeness, a truth began to surface. The law was less a blade than a mirror. It asked not who deserves to fall, but who has been awake all along. As the day softened into evening, the city's pace slowed, as though guided by an unspoken agreement. Candles were lit with care, one flame leaning toward another. Windows glowed warmly, and behind them, families gathered not to celebrate, but to remember. In many noble houses, chests were opened that had not been touched in years. The scent of old paper and dried herbs rose into the rooms. Children listened from doorways as elders spoke of names that no longer appeared on banners, of choices made during lean years, of kindnesses extended when no reward was promised. These stories moved gently, without accusation, settling like dust that reveals the shape of what it covers. Lady Serene sat with her aunt by the hearth. They shared bread and honey, simple and grounding. Her aunt spoke of the bridge in the tapestry, the flood that had taken fields but spared lives because someone stayed and worked through the night. Serene listened, feeling a quiet gratitude bloom. Whatever the law measured, she thought, these moments had weight. Across the hill, Lord Halver dismissed his guests early. Alone again, he stared into the fire, its rhythm steady, forgiving. He remembered a winter when he had chosen comfort over duty, telling himself the delay was temporary. He had not thought of it since. Memory now returned without anger, only clarity. In the archives, Master Elion closed the last ledger for the night. He covered the tables, smoothing the cloths as if tucking the records into sleep. The law would wait until morning. It always did. Patience, he knew, was not merely endurance. It was respect for the pace at which understanding arrives. The bells rang once more, and the city exhaled. In the hush that followed, people lay down with thoughts both heavy and hopeful. The forgotten law had stirred something deeper than fear. It had stirred attention, and attention, when given gently, can be the beginning of rest. Dawn came wrapped in pale blue, the kind of morning that feels like a promise whispered rather than spoken aloud. The river moved smoothly through the city, carrying reflections of bridges and clouds alike, indifferent to titles and seals. Along its banks, people walked slowly, letting the day find them. The council reconvened without ceremony. There were no raised voices, no urgent gestures. Instead, there was a shared understanding that haste would only blur what needed careful sight. Reports were received, not argued. Questions were asked softly, leaving room for thought. One by one, smaller families were mentioned, houses whose names rarely echoed beyond their wards. Some had records thin as reeds, yet strong with continuity. Service repeated quietly across generations. Presence maintained. When these were read aloud, a warmth moved through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. Lady Serene listened and felt her shoulders ease. Courage, she realized, did not always announce itself. Often, it sounded like persistence, like showing up, like tending what had been given without seeking applause. Lord Halver felt something else, the narrowing of options. Not panic, he had long since learned to keep that at bay, but recognition. The law rewarded steadiness more than brilliance. He wondered, briefly, what it might feel like to speak plainly, to let the mirror stand unpolished. The thought surprised him with its gentleness. Outside, the city went on. A child skipped stones. A vendor arranged apples by color. Life, untroubled by statutes, offered its steady rhythm as reassurance. By midday, the council adjourned again. No conclusions were announced. None were needed yet. The process itself had become a kind of shelter, slow, fair, and human. As shadows lengthened, a calm settled over those who had feared the loudness of judgment. The law was not shouting, it was listening. That night, rain came softly, as if instructed not to wake anyone. It tapped at rooftops and traced the grooves of old stone, finding paths worn by centuries of weather and waiting. The city accepted the sound gratefully, letting it smooth the edges of anxious thought. In many houses, people slept more deeply than they had in days. Dreams wandered through familiar places, gardens, workshops, riverbanks, where hands were busy and purpose was simple. Even uncertainty, when shared by all, seemed lighter. Lady Serene dreamed of weaving. Threads passed through her fingers, some bright, some muted, each necessary, each crossing another. When she woke, the image stayed with her. She rose before the household stirred and wrote a letter to the council. offering access to family lands long kept private, where records of shared labor were carved into beams and stones. It felt right, like loosening a knot. Lord Halver did not sleep as well. Yet when dawn arrived, he felt clearer. He ordered the opening of a long-locked wing, one rumored to hold little of value. Dust billowed as doors swung wide, revealing ledgers kept by caretakers whose names never reached the dining hall. He stood there quietly, reading entries made in careful script, noting how often the estate had been held together by unseen hands. In the archives, Master Elion welcomed the morning with warm bread and a nod to the rain-washed light. New documents arrived, carried with care. The tables filled again, not with defenses alone, but with offering stories willing to be seen. As the day unfolded, a pattern emerged. The law was not unraveling the realm. It was stitching it thread by thread into something more honest. Outside, the rain eased, the river shone, and within the slow work of review, a steady peace took hold. The days that followed found their rhythm, unhurried and deliberate. Each morning, the council gathered. Each evening, the city rested. In between, silences grew more expressive than speeches. What was not presented began to matter as much as what was. A minor house, long respected for its hospitality, submitted little more than a single ledger and a handful of letters. Yet the gaps were telling not of neglect, but of trust. Neighbors testified freely, their voices calm, their memories aligned. The law received this with quiet approval, noting continuity where ink was sparse. Another family, grand in name and reach, brought volumes bound in leather, heavy with seals. The records were impressive, exhaustive and curiously narrow. Years of careful accounting left little room for the ordinary. The council did not frown. They simply listened, and the listening itself became a question. Lady Serene sat through these sessions with an even breath. She had learned to appreciate the pauses, the way truth often stepped forward when space was given. In those pauses, she felt her lineage settle into something steadier than pride. Lord Halver spoke less now. When asked, he answered plainly. It felt like setting down a weight he had carried out of habit. The room did not judge him for the change it noticed. That, somehow, was enough. Beyond the chamber, the city's sound softened. People spoke more thoughtfully, as if aware that words linger. At night, lantern light seemed warmer, the rain-scrubbed streets reflecting it like calm water. By the end of the week, no titles had been removed. None confirmed beyond question either. What had changed was subtler, a shared understanding that standing required more than standing still. And in that understanding, the realm found a deeper quiet one that invited rest rather than fear. In the days that followed, the council's work continued slowly, like water shaping stone. But outside its walls, life pressed gently against the city's boundaries. Among these, one place became a quiet witness, the old garden behind Lady Serene's family estate. Its hedges grew high, its paths winding, and its blooms carried the scent of seasons that no title could command. She wandered there each morning before the council convened, letting the earth and sun remind her of what endured quietly. Dew clung to petals like tiny jewels, and the soft hum of bees threaded through the air, steady and calm. Every leaf and stem seemed to carry a story of care, unseen yet essential. It was there, in the patience of growth, that Serene felt her own lineage mirrored. A gardener approached, broom in hand, not to interrupt, but to walk beside her. Together, they observed a patch where a fallen tree had been cut into benches. "It serves now," the gardener said softly. Though it once only stood, Serene nodded. She understood. The law measured deeds, Yes, but deeds of quiet persistence could weigh as much as grand displays. In another part of the city, Lord Halver moved among his retainers with similar care. He listened more than he commanded, asking questions about what had been done without recognition. What work had held the family estates steady in hard winters? Their answers were long, slow, and detailed, each word a thread in the fabric he had not noticed. Back in the council chamber, Master Elion examined parchments that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. He noted patterns across families, the subtle acts that spoke of diligence and honesty, the ones that often went unseen. The law's power, he realized, was in observing these threads, not severing them. As night fell, candles flickered in every window. The city exhaled softly, the river reflecting stars that seemed to lean closer. Even the smallest deeds, repeated with care, had begun to weave a quiet strength into the heart of the realm. A gentle wind rose the next morning, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine into the city streets. It moved unnoticed through alleyways, over rooftops, and into open windows, brushing lightly against the parchments that had begun to travel between families. Letters, carefully sealed, now crossed doors where they had not been invited before, messengers walking slowly, allowing the world to hear only their soft steps. Lady Serene sent one such letter to a distant cousin, whose lands touched the border of the kingdom. She wrote, not to defend herself, but to offer a record of shared labors, the building of wells, the planting of orchards, the tending of fields that fed the city. Each act, she noted, mattered as much as any grand council meeting or proclamation. Lord Halver, reading a reply in the quiet of his study, felt a subtle shift within himself. The cousin's words did not contest, they acknowledged. The ink spoke of small, steady contributions, of nights spent keeping the estate from falling into neglect. Halver leaned back, breathing slowly. There was relief here, yes, but also understanding. The law did not demand heroics, it required presence. In the archives, Master Elion catalogued these letters with careful hands. Each envelope, each seal, carried the weight of a history that had survived quietly, unseen. He paused often, lifting his gaze to the high windows, watching sunlight bend along the dust and stone. There was a serenity in this work, a quiet joy in noticing what others might have missed. Meanwhile, in the city's narrower streets, people paused at market stalls and street corners, sharing snippets of news with neighbors. The law remembers, they whispered, and it felt less threatening, more instructive. Children laughed along the riverbank, tossing stones that made small ripples, each expanding gently outward like deeds that moved beyond their immediate reach. By twilight, the wind had slowed, leaving a calm that carried through the streets, the council, and the gardens alike. And in that stillness, a subtle truth became apparent. The forgotten law, once feared, was shaping not just families, but the quiet courage that underpinned the entire realm. Evening settled with a hush, soft as velvet, across the city. In countless homes, fires glowed low, casting gentle shadows that danced along walls lined with familiar objects, cups, bowls, books, and the worn chairs that held generations. The hearth spoke in warmth and flicker, reminding those who paused that comfort could coexist with vigilance, and that care was a quiet kind of strength. Lady Serene sat near the fire, a cup of herbal tea steaming in her hands. She watched the flames lick the edge of the hearth, thinking of her ancestors who had tended this very home. Their deeds small yet vital. Each act of maintenance, each word spoken with thought, had become part of the invisible fabric that held the family together. Now, as the law resurfaced, she realized it was not punishment she feared, but recognition, or perhaps reckoning, of what had been quietly done and quietly omitted. Lord Halver, across the city in his own study, felt the hearth's presence in his bones. He traced the history of his family in his mind. Winters survived by careful planning, disputes averted by listening, corners smoothed by patience. Firelight reflected in his eyes, steadying him. Here, amid the warmth, he understood that the law's measure was not only of titles, but of consistency, of care extended over time. Meanwhile, in a small attic above the council chambers, the scribes recorded the day's proceedings. Ink flowed slowly over parchment, the scratching of quills mingling with the soft creak of the floorboards and the occasional sigh of settling stone. Every word mattered, every detail preserved, not for spectacle, but for the quiet accuracy that would honor both history and humanity. Outside, a breeze moved along the streets, stirring lanterns that hung over doorways, whispering to the night. Windows glowed faintly as families settled into their routines, each motion measured and calm, each thought slowly turning toward rest. The forgotten law, though present, did not need loud declaration. It lived in the quiet, in the hearth's warmth, in the careful tending of what had been entrusted. And as the city exhaled into night, it seemed for a moment that even the air itself held its breath in respect and acknowledgement, that vigilance and care could be gentle, that the smallest deeds often left the deepest impressions. The morning light crept slowly through the tall windows of the council chamber, touching the portraits that lined the walls. Faces frozen in oil seemed to watch, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity, as if waiting to see how their descendants would honor the past. Even the floors creaked differently in this gentle light, carrying echoes of conversations long forgotten. Lady Serene moved along the hallways of her family estate, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpets. She paused at each portrait, each carved relief, reading the history embedded in wood and paint. She thought of the lives that had gone unnoticed, the small acts of devotion and responsibility that had kept the family stable across generations. She realized the forgotten law was less a threat than a reminder. Every choice, however quiet, left a trace. Lord Halver, pacing the stone corridors of his estate, felt a similar awareness. His family's grandeur was impressive, but it was the unnoticed axe letters sent to distant kin, repairs made in silence, moments of listening that now seemed most vital. He found himself noting them in his mind, cataloguing them not for display, but for memory. In the council chamber, Master Elian began reading aloud from records newly discovered. Each parchment carried the weight of a life, of a decision, of time carefully marked. The scribes listened with patience, recording details that might otherwise vanish. The law's intention was clear: to honor what had been done with integrity, and to illuminate what had been neglected. Outside, the city moved with slow deliberation. Markets opened with gentle sounds, carts rolling softly over stone streets, voices low yet steady. Birds perched on rooftops, their morning songs carried lightly on the breeze. The world continued its rhythm, undisturbed by the unfolding reckoning. By noon, a sense of calm authority filled the air. The law, though formidable, demanded attention without fear. In the quiet of the hallways, in the soft rustle of pages, and in the unhurried rhythm of daily life, the realm discovered a new balance: vigilance tempered by patience, responsibility framed by reflection. Evening fell with a soft sigh, and the tower where Miro kept the original parchment seemed to lean closer to the earth, listening. Candles flickered in the high windows, casting long shadows across stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, old wood, and the lingering chill of the approaching night. Mero walked slowly among the shelves, her hands brushing against spines and folded maps. Each book, each ledger, was a quiet witness to the lives and decisions of families long past. She paused before the chest that had first revealed the law, feeling the weight of its presence once more. Though she had touched it countless times, it seemed different tonight, less an object, more a living memory waiting to be acknowledged. She placed her lantern on the table and lifted the parchment carefully, tracing the words with her fingertips. The ink had deepened in color, almost as if it recognized her attention. Miro read silently, letting the language sink into her bones. The measures of lineage, the subtle distinctions between presence and neglect, the gentle insistence that responsibility matters even when unnoticed. Far below, in the city, lanterns glimmered along streets quieted by night. A soft breeze stirred curtains and flickered flames, carrying whispers of deeds done in silence and care. Servants swept hearths, bakers closed their ovens, and children dreamed of gardens and rivers. Life moved deliberately, slowly, with an awareness that even small actions left enduring traces. Mero closed the parchment, tucking it back in its cloth. The chest clicked shut, the sound soft yet resolute. She sat in the quiet, feeling the rhythm of the tower, the slow, patient pulse of time itself. And in that quiet, she understood a truth the law had been trying to impart. Vigilance need not roar to be powerful. Attention, patience, and care, repeated over years, could shape the destiny of families as surely as any decree. Outside, the wind carried a faint echo through the streets. The city exhaled, ready to rest, while within the tower, the keeper remained, a silent guardian of history and hope alike. The first light of morning spread slowly across the city, softening rooftops and gilding the river's surface with a gentle glow. Mist hovered low in the streets, curling around lampposts and archways, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and blooming herbs. The city felt unusually still, as though it, too, were waiting for something that could not yet be seen. Lady Sereni stepped quietly from her estate, letting her boots sink softly into the dew-damped cobblestones. She carried a small satchel of records and letters, bound carefully with twine, and moved toward the council chambers. Every step felt deliberate, grounding her in a rhythm older than any fear or expectation. Even the distant clatter of a cart on stone seemed measured, echoing slowly, gently, across the city's waking heart. Lord Halver, across the hill in his study, watched sunlight creep over his library shelves. He traced his fingers along familiar spines and paused over journals he had almost forgotten. Each entry recorded patience and service, moments uncelebrated yet vital. A realization came, quiet but clear. The law measured more than mistakes, it measured presence, and how faithfully one tended what was entrusted. Inside the council chambers, Master Elion began another day of careful readings. Scrolls were unfurled, ink catching in the morning light. Scribes copied diligently, letting each word settle before continuing, understanding that haste could distort the meaning. Outside the windows, birds perched on ledges and rooflines, chirping softly as if to mark the passage of time with gentle approval. As the day unfolded, letters and records moved between families. Some offered recognition, some apologized for past neglect, some simply recounted ordinary actions that had been long overlooked. Each word, each acknowledgement, felt weighty yet comforting. Slowly, the law's presence was no longer a threat, it was a mirror, reflecting not only duty and lineage, but the quiet care that made life endure. By midday, the mist had lifted, revealing the city in full light. Lanterns now hung only for charm, not necessity. The river gleamed, and children's laughter could be heard across the squares, light and unhurried. Even the tallest banners seemed to sway with a newfound calm. For the first time since the law resurfaced, the city itself felt the steady pulse of understanding, patience, and careful attention. The tower where Mero kept the original parchment seemed quieter than ever that morning. Sunlight spilled through narrow windows, slanting across the stone floors and illuminating motes of dust that floated lazily in the warm air. The scent of aged wood and beeswax mingled with a faint hint of parchment, creating a calm, almost sacred atmosphere. Mero moved with practiced care, her steps slow and deliberate. She reached for the chest again, brushing her hands lightly over its carved surface. The lock bore the familiar crest split by a river. Worn with Eigand, she felt the same chill she had felt the first time she opened it. Not fear, but anticipation. The law was patient, but it demanded attention. As she opened the chest, she noticed small details she had never paid attention to before. Faint smudges of ink at the edges of the parchment, a crease where it had been folded repeatedly, and a tiny fragment of pressed flour that had slipped between the folds long ago. These small traces whispered of hands that had touched the law before her, of care and intent that transcended generations. Outside the tower, the city stirred. A messenger crossed the square with letters bound in soft leather, their contents meant for families both distant and near. Horses moved slowly, their hooves tapping against stone, and shopkeepers lifted shutters with gentle precision, letting the day arrive at its own pace. Even the river seemed to flow more deliberately, carrying reflections of sunlight and clouds with measured grace. Mero unfurled the parchment, tracing the lines of ink with her fingertips. She read each clause aloud in a soft voice, letting the words resonate in the high, empty spaces of the tower. They spoke of duties quietly observed, of lineage honored through patient service, of actions unrecorded yet vital. The law was not punishment, it was recognition, and its weight was measured not in fear, but in attentiveness. As the day deepened, Mero carefully folded the parchment and returned it to the chest. The chest clicked softly, a sound that seemed to echo through the empty corridors. She lingered for a moment in the silence, listening to the gentle hum of the tower, feeling the slow, steady pulse of time and understanding that flowed through the city below. The afternoon sun drifted lazily across the city, painting rooftops and bridges in warm shades of gold. The river, winding through the streets like a silver ribbon, carried reflections of clouds and spires, its surface rippling gently with each passing breeze. The water seemed to murmur softly, as if aware of the quiet reckoning unfolding along its banks. Lady Serene walked beside the river, her hands brushing lightly along the railing. The world felt slow and deliberate here, each sound and motion measured in its own time. She paused to watch the water swirl around a stone, the eddies catching sunlight like tiny flames. It reminded her of the families under scrutiny, each current representing deeds, small or large, yet all essential to the flow of life. Along the riverbank, messengers moved carefully, their leather satchels tapping softly against their sides. Letters passed from hand to hand, carrying acknowledgement, apology, and memory. One envelope, bound in faded green ribbon, found its way to Srini, detailing the quiet work of a distant cousin who had tended lands and livestock without ever seeking recognition. She smiled, feeling warmth bloomed quietly in her chest. The law, she realized, honored these unseen efforts. Meanwhile, Lord Halvar walked along another stretch of the river, pausing to watch a heron step delicately along the shallows. The bird's careful movements mirrored the vigilance he now felt toward his own family records. He recalled servants and stewards whose work had gone unnoticed for decades, small acts of persistence that now shone like lanterns in the dim corners of history. Even in reflection, he felt a quiet relief. The law measured not only mistakes, but the constancy of attention, the presence of care. Back in the council chambers, scribes recorded every detail of letters and testimony, the scratching of quills blending with the gentle lapping of the river outside. Patterns began to emerge, threads connecting families, actions echoing across generations. The law's power was subtle, woven through the quiet vigilance of everyday life, rather than loud decrees or punishments. As evening fell, lanterns reflected along the water, and the city exhaled softly. The river continued its slow journey, carrying whispers of deeds done in silence and patience, teaching the realm that even small, unnoticed acts could shape history. Night settled over the city with a softness that seemed almost deliberate, draping rooftops and narrow streets in deep indigo. Lanterns glimmered along the walkways, their light refracting on damp stones where the day's mist lingered. The world moved quietly now, each sound deliberate, each breath measured, as if aware of the law's slow but steady gaze. In the council chambers, Master Elion and the scribes worked by candlelight, their quills scratching softly across parchment, each line recorded carefully, not hurriedly, the actions of families under review. Some deeds were small, almost invisible, a repaired fence, a shared loaf of bread, a night spent guarding a border while others slept. Others were more prominent, yet no louder than the quiet diligence of the unseen. Elion paused often, letting each word settle before continuing. In the slow pace, he found clarity. Lady Serene returned to her family estate, carrying letters that had traveled long distances, recounting acts of service from relatives she had never met. She read them slowly by the hearth, imagining each scene, tending the sick, mending broken tools, guiding travelers safely along dark roads. With each story, she felt the law's gentle hand, not as threat, but as acknowledgement. Presence, persistence, and care were being weighed, measured with patience and precision. Lord Halver, pacing the corridors of his estate, reviewed inventories and ledgers that recorded years of work. He noted what had been done quietly, without recognition or fanfare, and for the first time he felt a soft pride in the unseen. The law's requirement was not perfection, but constancy, attention to responsibility, repeated over time. He breathed slowly, letting the knowledge settle. Outside, the city was hushed, save for the soft rustle of wind through trees and the gentle lap of water along the riverbank. The night seemed to stretch, slow and deliberate, offering a calm stage for reflection. In every corner, the world moved quietly, each moment a testament to steady care. And as the lanterns flickered and the city exhaled, the law's presence became less a burden and more a reminder that even the smallest, quietest actions ripple through time, shaping the strength of families and the rhythm of a realm. Dawn arrived wrapped in the softest gold, slipping gently over rooftops and the river's calm surface. Mist clung to the streets, curling around lampposts and archways, as if reluctant to leave the city's quiet embrace. The world seemed to hold its breath, allowing the day to begin slowly, with deliberation and care. Lady Serene moved through the gardens of her estate, where dew clung to petals and leaves like tiny jewels. The scent of damp earth and blooming herbs was comforting, grounding her in the moment. She knelt to examine a small patch of vegetables, noting how the work of tending simple, repetitive, often unseen kept life flowing, nurtured families, and preserved continuity. These small acts, she realized, were the foundation upon which the law now rested its gentle scrutiny. Lord Halver observed his stewards and retainers with renewed attention. He asked soft questions, listening carefully to the responses, noting details that had previously gone unnoticed. The care of the estate, the quiet stewardship of individuals, Acting without expectation was what gave the family strength. For the first time, he measured the weight of patience and diligence, rather than the size of titles or banners. In the council chambers, Master Elion sorted records with meticulous care, letting each parchment rest in its place. The scribes copied letters and accounts with precision, mindful of every detail. Some deeds were humble, others grand, yet all were recorded with the same calm attention. The law's essence, it became clear, was not in judgment alone, but in witnessing, in honoring presence and sustained care across time. Outside, the city moved slowly. A baker lifted the shutter of her shop, letting the first light touch the rows of bread she had baked before dawn. Children padded softly to the river's edge, skipping stones that made ripples expanding outward, quiet yet persistent. Even the birds seemed to sing deliberately, each note falling into the day's measured rhythm. As the sun climbed, the warmth spread gently, and the city's inhabitants carried on with a sense of purpose tempered by patience. In the subtle acts of service recorded and unrecorded, the law found its quiet power, shaping not through fear, but through reflection, attentiveness, and care. The afternoon sun leaned low, casting long shadows across the city streets. Stone walls glowed amber, and the river reflected the soft light like a ribbon of molten gold. Even the breeze seemed careful, curling through alleys and across bridges, stirring leaves without hurry. Time itself felt slower, as if honoring the careful unfolding of the law. Lady Serene wandered through the family's gallery, stopping before a portrait of an ancestor she had never met. The face was stern, yet not unkind, the eyes fixed on a point beyond the canvas, as if witnessing the unfolding present. She traced the frame lightly with her fingers, remembering stories whispered by her grandmother, tales of bravery, of quiet kindness, of choices made when no one was watching. Now, she realized, those stories carried weight. The law did not overlook them. Every decision, every act of care, was a thread in the fabric that held her family's name. Lord Halvere moved along the halls of his estate, the shadows stretching behind him like dark, gentle reminders of past deeds. He paused before ledgers and journals, reading entries with careful attention. Even mistakes, when faced honestly, held value. They marked lessons learned, responsibilities acknowledged, paths corrected. The law, he understood, measured presence as much as perfection. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of generations settle evenly across his shoulders. In the council chamber, Master Elion continued his methodical work. Scrolls and letters were examined under the soft afternoon light. Some entries were faint, written by hands long gone, yet each held meaning. The law did not require loud deeds. It valued constancy, observation, and quiet courage. The scribes recorded every detail, their motions slow and deliberate, as if giving each story the time it deserved to be understood. Outside, the city's streets moved with subdued rhythm. A child's laughter echoed faintly from the riverbank, mixing with the gentle murmur of water over stones. Lanterns hung in preparation for night, already glowing faintly against the deepening shadows. The world seemed to pause, honoring the balance of past and present, action and reflection. And in that pause, the forgotten law reminded all who watched and listened. History lives not only in proclamations and titles, but in the small, deliberate acts that weave the enduring strength of a family, a city, a realm. Night descended softly, folding the city into a blanket of quiet. Lanterns were lit along the streets, their warm glow shimmering on the damp stones and reflecting gently in the slow-moving river. The scent of wood smoke and evening herbs filled the air, mingling with the faint chill that clung to the edges of rooftops. The city, awake yet subdued, seemed to breathe in unison, as if listening to the law's patient unfolding. Lady Serene moved along the lantern-lit paths of her garden. Her footsteps were slow, careful, so as not to disturb the fragile glow of candlelight spilling across the hedges. She paused beside a rosebush, noticing petals wet with evening dew. Each droplet held the reflection of lantern light, small yet radiant. She thought of her ancestors, of every unnoticed kindness, every quiet act of stewardship. They were like these droplets, small points of light holding the warmth of continuity. Lord Halver, meanwhile, walked along the corridors of his estate, the soft glow of wall sconces casting gentle shadows. He carried letters from distant relatives, read them slowly, absorbing the details of patient labor, hidden sacrifices, and small acts of care. With each word, he felt the law's influence less as a threat and more as a gentle measure of awareness, reminding him that even the unseen actions of generations mattered. In the council chambers, Master Elian and the scribes worked by candlelight, their quills scratching softly across parchment. Every recorded deed, no matter how modest, was catalogued with care. Outside, the faint murmur of the river carried through open windows, blending with the soft rustle of pages. The law's quiet power was in observation, in honoring the patient diligence of families who had upheld their responsibilities across years of ordinary days. By late evening, the city itself seemed to soften further, settling into a slow, deliberate rhythm. Lantern light shimmered on walls, water, and cobblestones alike. The air held a stillness that felt like understanding, and in that stillness, all who moved beneath the gentle glow of the lamps sensed a shared truth. Continuity, care, and attention, though quiet and often unnoticed, are what uphold a family, a city, and a realm. The tower where Mero tended the original parchment was bathed in moonlight, pale and gentle, filtering through narrow windows to fall in silver streaks across the stone floor. The air smelled faintly of aged wood and cold night, and the quiet seemed almost alive, wrapping around her as she moved with slow, deliberate steps. Mero approached the chest once more, her hands steady, heart calm. She opened it and lifted the parchment, tracing the ink with the tip of her finger. The words, though old and faded in parts, felt alive in the quiet night. They spoke of lineage, measured not only by birthright, but by care, diligence, and presence across generations. She exhaled slowly, letting the truth of it settle. The law was patient, exacting, yet gentle. Outside, the city slumbered under the same moon, lanterns extinguished or flickering low. A cat padded silently along the garden wall, its steps soft as whispered stories, while the river moved with a subtle shimmer, carrying reflections of distant stars. Even the wind seemed to tiptoe, stirring the branches with careful attention, as if reluctant to disturb the world's quiet contemplation. Moreau carefully folded the parchment and returned it to the chest. The metal clicked softly, a final note in the night's stillness. She sat for a long moment, listening to the rhythm of the tower, the slow, measured pulse of time and responsibility, of observation and remembrance. In that rhythm, she understood fully the law's power. It demanded not fear, but mindfulness, not haste, but patient acknowledgement. When she finally rose and moved to her chamber, the silence followed her, comforting rather than oppressive. Outside, the river whispered against the banks, the trees shifted gently in the night breeze, and the city held its breath in quiet anticipation. The forgotten law, patient and steady, reminded all who were attentive that legacy was woven not only in grand acts, but in every small, consistent care taken across time. Morning arrived slow and soft, spilling pale light across the city and slipping into every corner of the council chambers. The streets were quiet. mist curling along rooftops and winding between alleyways like a careful hand smoothing the day awake. Even the river moved deliberately, carrying reflections of clouds and the soft shimmer of sunbeams that seemed to linger longer than usual. Lady Serene walked through the corridors of her estate, her steps deliberate, hands brushing along the polished wood of door frames and banisters. She carried letters and records from distant relatives, each one a quiet testimony of consistent care, unseen diligence, and gentle responsibility. Reading them, she felt a quiet humility bloom within her, a recognition that the law did not demand perfection, only the steady presence that gave life and lineage meaning. Lord Halvey moved through his library with similar patience. His eyes rested on ledgers, journals, and notes he had long overlooked. Each entry told of someone present when needed, attentive even when unnoticed, doing the small work that allowed the family estate to endure. He traced these details with care, realizing that continuity and attentiveness could hold more power than the loudest proclamation or grandest banner. In the council chambers, Master Elian read the day's records aloud, his voice calm, measured, reverent. Scribes copied each word, letting the details settle, mindful of the weight in their task. Every act, however small, was considered, every absence noted. The law did not hurry, but it observed carefully, and the chamber felt its slow, impartial gravity in the stillness. Outside, the city moved gently into the morning. Bakers opened their shops with soft clinks of tools. Children padded along cobblestones, and the river carried the light of the day downstream in quiet procession. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, early blooms and wood smoke from hearths newly lit. It was a day that asked nothing but attention, a reminder that the weight of presence repeated steadily over the council, reconvened just after mid-morning. The chamber bathed in pale sunlight that filtered through tall, arched windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, moving in slow spirals as though the very air was holding its breath. The city beyond remained calm, streets nearly empty, as if the world itself were pausing to witness the work of careful reckoning. Master Elion began the day by examining new records delivered from distant families. Scrolls and letters were laid across the council table like a map of lives, each containing small details of labor, care, and continuity. The scribes followed his movements with quiet diligence, copying each observation carefully, leaving no word unattended. The law, though long forgotten, demanded thoroughness without rush, and the room adapted to its pace naturally. Lady Serene arrived, carrying letters bound in soft leather. She placed them carefully on the table, their contents recounting nights spent tending orchards, weeks spent repairing bridges, and months of service offered quietly to neighbors and kin alike. These small deeds, often overlooked in the grandeur of noble life, were now illuminated by the law's slow attention. Serene felt a calm satisfaction in knowing that constancy, not spectacle, was valued here. Lord Halvey, observing the proceedings, began reviewing his own family's records with a measured patience he had never allowed himself before. He traced the quiet acts of generations, the careful management of fields, the attention given to servants and stewards, the letters sent to distant kin to offer guidance or help. Each act, he realized, was as important as any title, any feast, any public display. Presence and care, repeated over time, had quietly built the family's enduring strength. Outside, the city remained still yet vibrant in its subtle life. A baker's bell tinkled softly as she opened her shutters. A child's laughter drifted along the riverbank. Leaves whispered as a gentle breeze passed through trees. The world moved slowly, deliberately, mirroring the careful audit unfolding within the council chambers. As the day wore on, a sense of measured accomplishment filled the room. No judgments were pronounced, no titles removed, no proclamations shouted. Instead, the law's quiet power lay in witnessing gnawing the unheralded acts of attention, service, and responsibility that had sustained the realm across generations. The sky darkened slowly, brushing the horizon with soft hues of lavender and amber. Lanterns glimmered along the garden paths of Lady Serene's estate, their warm light pooling on dew-kissed leaves. The scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers hung in the air, thick yet soothing, as if the world itself were breathing in a long, gentle sigh. Serene wandered among the hedges and flower beds, her fingers brushing lightly against petals and stems. She paused at a small fountain where water spilled over stone edges, its sound quiet and repetitive, a slow melody to accompany her thoughts. Each droplet reminded her of the acts of care that had gone unnoticed through generations, mending fences, helping neighbors, keeping watch over sick livestock, or guiding travelers safely through dark roads. The law, she realized, acknowledged these small, persistent actions as much as any grand feast or ceremony. Lord Halver, meanwhile, walked the shadowed corridors of his own estate. He carried ledgers and letters, tracing the meticulous records of service kept by stewards, servants, and minor relatives. The details of these small acts, hidden from public view but crucial to maintaining life and lineage, felt weighty in his hands. He realized that the law's true measure was not in punishment or spectacle, but in observing and honoring steady, faithful diligence. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes worked by candlelight, the soft scratching of quills mingling with the occasional sigh of stone settling. Every letter, ledger, and record was considered carefully, every detail given attention without hurry. The law, though forgotten for generations, demanded patience and mindfulness. It weighed not haste or grandeur, but constancy and care. Outside, the city softened as night deepened. The river reflected lantern light in slow ripples. Footsteps echoed softly along quiet streets, and the air carried a gentle coolness, inviting reflection. The realm, in its steady pace, seemed to understand that even the smallest acts carried out with care could hold the weight of history. And as Lady Serene paused to watch a cluster of stars reflect in the fountain, she felt a gentle certainty. The law was not a blade to sever, but a mirror to show the enduring strength of those who tended their duties with quiet devotion. As the day leaned toward evening, the sky deepened into soft shades of rose and violet. Lanterns flickered to life along streets and bridges, casting a warm glow on cobblestones damp with the day's lingering mist. The city moved quietly, each sound measured and calmed the distant hum of a cart, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional clink of tools being set aside as work ended for the day. Lady Serene walked slowly through the estate's gates, carrying a small stack of letters tied with ribbon. Each one had traveled from a distant relative, recounting acts of care and responsibility often unnoticed. A winter spent repairing a roof, a summer spent guiding a caravan through treacherous roads, a night spent tending the sick when no one watched. She read each letter with patience, letting the stories settle like stones into a calm pool. Each word was a quiet affirmation that constancy mattered, that even unseen deeds held value in the eyes of the law. Across the city, Lord Halver lingered in his study, examining ledgers and journals. He noted the small actions of generations, the stewards who managed the estates with care, the letters sent to maintain distant kinships, the subtle choices that had preserved stability and trust. Slowly, he began to see the measure of his family, not in grand feasts or titles, but in the constancy of these minor, persistent efforts. The law, he realized, rewarded presence more than grandeur, patience more than spectacle. In the council chambers, Master Elion carefully recorded each letter, noting every detail. The scribes copied with meticulous care, their quills scratching softly in rhythm with the distant evening sounds. Outside the tall windows, the river shimmered faintly under the fading light, carrying reflections of clouds and lanterns along its slow path. The city itself seemed to breathe in unison with the quiet work. Shopkeepers closed their stalls gently. Children's laughter faded to sleepy murmurs, and lantern light reflected across windows and stone walls. The forgotten law was present, but not as a threat. It was a gentle witness, observing and honoring the patience, care, and diligence that had quietly shaped the realm for generations. Night had fully descended, and the moon rose high, casting a pale silver light over the city. Its glow touched rooftops and rivers, weaving shadows among chimneys and alleyways. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and evening blossoms. Even the stars seemed to shine with a patient steadiness, as if they had been waiting all along for this quiet reckoning to unfold. In the tower, Mero stood at the window, gazing down at the city below. The streets were hushed. Only the distant murmur of the river and the occasional footstep of a night watchman broke the silence. She felt the weight of the parchment she had guarded so long pressing softly against her thoughts. Its words, though old and precise, seemed alive tonight, reminding her that every careful act, every consistent attention given across years, shaped the life of the realm. Lady Serene lit a lantern in the garden, the glow reflecting softly in the dewdrops along the paths. She paused to watch shadows stretch and bend among the hedges. Each plant, each carefully tended flower, seemed to hold a memory of care and patience. It reminded her that the law was not a harsh blade, but a quiet observer, measuring what had been tended, preserved, and nurtured. Lord Halver, walking along the corridors of his estate, held letters in his hands. They were simple accounts of service, repairs made quietly, neighbors aided discreetly, responsibilities attended to without applause. As he read, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. The law did not demand grandeur, it demanded attentiveness. Presence, care, and vigilance, repeated over time, were more powerful than any proclamation or banner. Outside, the city seemed to exhale. Lanterns flickered, the river mirrored the moon's reflection, and the trees whispered softly with the breeze. In every quiet corner, small acts of care, both remembered and forgotten, wove themselves into the night, a tapestry of endurance and patience. And in that soft luminescence, the city felt steady, knowing that even in silence, the law watched gently, measuring not fear but fidelity. The following morning arrived with a tender light, soft and warm, slipping slowly through the tall windows of the council chambers. Dust motes danced lazily in the beams, drifting as though reluctant to settle. Outside, the streets were quiet, cobblestones still damp from the previous night's dew, and the river moved with deliberate ease, reflecting the awakening sky. Lady Serene carried a stack of letters to the council. Each one told a story of ordinary devotion: a steward who spent long nights repairing tools, a neighbor who guided lost travelers home, a distant cousin who attended lands unseen. She placed the letters carefully on the table, as if setting small treasures into the light. Reading them, the council saw that the law measured more than fault, it measured attentive presence, repeated over years with quiet diligence. Lord Halver reviewed his family's records with a calm attentiveness he had never permitted himself before. For every ledger detailing wealth or title, he found smaller entries of patient care and stewardship: gardens tended, walls repaired, disputes mediated quietly. These deeds, repeated consistently, now revealed themselves as true strength. He understood, finally, that the law did not punish absence alone, but rewarded the subtle constancy that had sustained families through generations. Master Elian spoke slowly, reading excerpts aloud, letting each detail linger before moving on. The scribes copied with care, aware that the record itself was becoming part of the realm's memory, preserving not only actions but the very rhythm of attentive life. The chamber was still, filled only with the soft rustle of parchment and the faint scratching of quills. Beyond the council chambers, the city moved gently. A baker's bell rang faintly, children padded through quiet streets, and the river carried reflections of rooftops and clouds alike. Even the smallest sounds seemed significant, marking the pulse of a city learning to understand the measure of the law. It was not an instrument of fear, but a mirror reflecting those who had lived with care and attention. By midday, a subtle shift had begun to settle over the city. Families carried themselves with awareness, letters were read and sent with thought, and the council moved slowly, patiently, marking each act of devotion without haste. The law, though long forgotten, had awakened to witness, and in doing so, inspired understanding among those it observed. The afternoon stretched lazily across the city, painting walls and rooftops in soft shades of gold and rose. Shadows lengthened along narrow streets, curling gently around doorways and alleyways, while the river shimmered like a thread of molten silver, carrying the reflection of clouds and distant trees with measured grace. The city seemed to breathe slowly, deliberately, as if it had learned patience from the law's quiet observation. Lady Serene walked through the gardens of her estate, the air fragrant with evening blooms and the faint scent of damp earth. She paused beside a fountain where water flowed steadily, unnoticed by most, yet essential to the life around it. Watching the droplets cascade, she thought of the unseen acts of generations, hands that had repaired roofs, tended sick animals, guided travelers, or offered quiet counsel. Each act, small and unheralded, carried weight in the law's patient gaze. Lord Halver lingered in his study, reviewing correspondence and ledgers. He noted the quiet diligence of servants and stewards, the careful maintenance of lands and records, and the subtle acts that had preserved the family through years of uncertainty. A calm understanding filled him. The law valued consistency, attentiveness, and presence more than spectacle or titles. Even mistakes, when met with acknowledgement and correction, held meaning. In the council chambers, Master Elian and his scribes worked slowly, deliberately. Letters were catalogued, records examined, and small details noted with care. Each word, each entry, was a testament to the persistent efforts that had sustained the realm. Outside, the city moved in soft rhythm. A baker closed her shutters. Children's footsteps echoed lightly along the riverbank, and the wind whispered through trees with deliberate gentleness. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit, scattering pools of warm light across streets and gardens. The city exhaled softly, wrapped in the stillness of anticipation. Families paused in doorways, reading letters, tending hearths, or simply standing in quiet reflection. The forgotten law, patient and impartial, watched all not as a force of fear but as a mirror, reflecting the enduring care and quiet courage that had carried generations through the unseen struggles of daily life. Night deepened across the city, soft and steady, draping rooftops, streets, and the river in a quiet calm. Lanterns glimmered gently along the walkways, their reflections rippling in the water like slow-moving flames. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and evening herbs, and the city seemed to breathe with a patient rhythm, as though aware of the quiet reckoning that had taken hold. Lady Serene moved slowly through her estate, her footsteps muffled on the stone paths. She paused at a small garden bench, running her fingers along its worn surface, thinking of the generations who had sat there before her, tending plants, thinking quietly, observing the world. She understood now that the law did not demand grand gestures. Its measure was subtle, rooted in the consistent, careful acts that sustained life and family over time. A repaired fence, a well-tended field, a letter sent across miles, all of it mattered. Lord Halvere lingered by the hearth in his study, reading letters from distant kin. Each one recounted acts of patience, service, and responsibility, often unnoticed by the wider world. As he read, he felt a sense of quiet awe for those who had quietly upheld their duties. The law, he realized, rewarded presence and diligence far more than ceremony or pride. Even in the smallest, most mundane actions, legacy and strength were built. In the council chambers, Master Elion and the scribes worked with deliberate calm. Every detail was recorded, every act noted, no matter how minor it seemed. Outside, the river carried the moonlight along its surface, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves in quiet celebration. The city itself seemed to lean into the night, recognizing that the slow, patient accumulation of small deeds formed the true foundation of life and lineage. By late evening, the realm was quiet, each household reflecting in its own way on the significance of attentiveness and care. The forgotten law, once feared, now stood as a gentle witness to the endurance of responsibility. It asked for nothing dramatic, only the steady, faithful attention that had always sustained families, communities, and the realm itself. The night deepened, and the river reflected the pale silver of the moon, flowing slowly as if in deliberate thought. Mist curled over the water's surface, drifting in soft tendrils that caressed the banks and the cobblestones of quiet streets. The city seemed suspended in a moment of attentive calm, each sound and movement measured, gentle, and unobtrusive. Lady Serene walked along the riverbank, her cloak brushing softly against her ankles. The faint scent of wet stone and night-blooming flowers mingled with the cool air, grounding her in the present. She paused to watch the river swirl around a stone, small eddies forming and dissolving with patient rhythm. It reminded her of the work of countless generations, small, persistent acts of care that shaped the life of the estate, the family, and the city itself. The law observed these deeds quietly, giving weight to actions that had often gone unnoticed. Lord Halvere, far across the city, moved through the hallways of his estate with deliberate care. He held letters recounting nights spent tending the sick, repairs done quietly, advice offered to distant kin. Each one seemed to hum with quiet importance. He understood that the law measured not the grandeur of deeds, but their constancy, the unbroken presence of those who nurtured, protected, and preserved. Even mistakes carried value when met with attention and honesty. In the council chambers, Master Elion read aloud the accounts sent from faraway estates. The scribes copied each word carefully, letting them linger in the air before writing. Outside, the river whispered along its banks, carrying reflections of moonlight and lanterns across the city. The sound was gentle, like a lullaby for the city itself, reminding all who listened that persistence and care, even in silence, created the foundation of strength and stability. As the night deepened further, the city exhaled a quiet rhythm of understanding. The forgotten law, patient and impartial, watched over each corner, each household, and each small act of diligence, affirming that endurance and attentiveness, repeated over time, were the true measures of legacy and honor. The early hours of the night held a profound stillness, as if the city itself had drawn a deep, slow breath. Lanterns flickered softly along the streets, and the gentle murmur of the river accompanied the occasional distant steps of a night watchman. Every sound seemed deliberate, every movement measured, creating a rhythm that mirrored the careful observance the forgotten law demanded. Lady Serene sat in the garden, wrapped in a warm cloak. She watched the shadows of the hedges lengthen under the moonlight, tracing patterns that shifted slowly with the night breeze. Each leaf and blossom seemed to hold a story of attention and care, small deeds repeated across generations. She realized that the law's weight was not in fear or punishment, but in recognition of persistence, presence, and the unseen labor that had sustained her family for centuries. Lord Halver moved quietly through the halls of his estate, a stack of letters in hand. They recounted nights spent tending livestock, repairing homes, and guiding travelers, simple acts performed without expectation of notice. As he read, he felt a quiet pride and humility mingle. The law measured more than grandeur. It measured the unbroken presence, the attentive vigilance that, quietly, held the realm together. In the council chamber, Master Elion and the scribes worked with deliberate care. Each scroll and letter was handled slowly, the scratching of quills soft and rhythmic, as though the room itself breathed with patience. The law, though long dormant, now observed and preserved these quiet threads, weaving them into a tapestry of understanding and endurance that stretched across families and generations. Outside, the city rested, the streets hushed, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the soft ripple of the river. Lanterns glowed warmly, casting gentle reflections across stone and water. In this stillness, the law's presence was not oppressive but affirming, a reminder that vigilance, patience, and caravan, when quiet and unnoticed, were the true markers of strength and legacy. The city lay draped in deep midnight blue, quiet except for the gentle ripple of the river and the distant hoot of an owl. Lanterns glowed dimly along streets and bridges, their light reflecting softly in the water, creating pools of calm that mirrored the stillness of the night. The world felt paused, as if waiting for careful observation to turn into understanding. Lady Serene sat in her study, the flickering candlelight illuminating the edges of the letters she had received. Each one carried stories of diligence, patience, and quiet devotion, generations of care often unseen, now recognized by the slow gaze of the law. She traced her fingers over the parchment, feeling the weight of countless small deeds that had preserved her family's legacy. The law, she realized, measured constancy more than grandeur, presence more than titles, and attentiveness more than recognition. Lord Halver, in his library across the city, leaned over ledgers and journals, reviewing the quiet work of his stewards and kin. Repairs made without notice, counsel offered without applause, vigilance sustained night after night. All of it was recorded, preserved, and acknowledged in the slow reckoning of the law. The realization settled over him like a warm blanket. Legacy was built not in spectacle, but in faithful, repeated care. In the council chamber, Master Elion catalogued the day's findings, quills scratching softly against parchment. Each act, no matter how small, was noted with the same care as larger deeds. Outside, the river moved with a gentle, reflective rhythm, carrying moonlight along its surface, mirroring the quiet diligence within the city's walls. Even the breeze seemed mindful, stirring leaves with soft patience, as if in harmony with the law's attentive watch. As midnight deepened, the city's quiet held a sense of purpose. Families reflected on their small contributions. Households rested in the satisfaction of duty fulfilled, and the forgotten law, patient and impartial, bore witness to all. In its quiet observation, it affirmed that attentiveness, presence, and care, though often unnoticed, were the foundation of strength, continuity, and enduring honor. The first hints of dawn were still far off, leaving the city wrapped in a velvety darkness, pierced only by lanterns casting warm pools of light along the cobblestone streets. The river reflected these glowing points like tiny stars, rippling softly as it moved with deliberate patience. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, earth, and the lingering smoke of hearth fires, carrying a sense of quiet anticipation. Lady Serene moved softly through the halls of her estate, careful not to disturb the gentle hush of the night. Each step echoed lightly on the polished stone, a soft accompaniment to the thoughts that swirled in her mind. She reflected on the letters and accounts she had read over the past days, thinking of the uncelebrated acts of care, a repaired gate, a firewood stacked for the cold, counsel given in confidence. These were the deeds the law honored, and she understood now that attentiveness, patience, and presence were as powerful as any formal title. Lord Halver paced his study, lantern in hand, reading over journals and records. He paused often, letting each detail sink in. The quiet service of distant cousins, the careful guidance of stewards, the small, consistent acts that had maintained the family estate through years of uncertainty. The law's measure was not punishment, he realized, but reflection and recognition are slow, deliberate acknowledgement of what had been done well and consistently over time. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes worked with the same calm precision. Every record, every letter, every note of service was documented carefully. The soft scratching of quills and the muted turning of parchment blended with the subtle sounds of the city at rest, creating an atmosphere of slow reverence. Outside, the night's stillness deepened, carrying with it the gentle reassurance of continuity. Lanterns flickered softly, trees whispered in the breeze, and the river moved with patient grace. In this calm, the forgotten law revealed its true purpose: to witness, to honor, and to affirm that even the smallest acts of care, repeated steadily and faithfully, held the weight of history and the power to shape the future. The river glimmered under the faint light of dawn, a long silver ribbon winding through the city in perfect stillness. Mist hovered low over the water, curling around bridge supports and riverbanks, softening edges and muffling sounds. The city itself seemed to pause, listening to the quiet murmur of the water as though it carried a gentle reminder of the law's patient presence. Lady Serene walked along the riverbank, her cloak brushing against the grass. She paused to watch the water swirl around a half-submerged stone, tiny eddies forming and dissolving with perfect patience. Each movement reminded her of the small acts of generations: the repaired roofs, tended gardens, quiet guidance, and attention that had preserved families quietly across decades. The law, she realized, honored these acts above all, recognizing constancy in presence rather than grandeur or proclamation. Lord Halver, in his study, read letters detailing similar acts from distant kin. Nights spent repairing tools, weeks spent tending fields, months of consistent service, all unremarked upon by the wider world, yet now illuminated by the law's slow gaze. A quiet warmth spread through him, a sense that the true measure of lineage and honor lay not in titles, but in the enduring attention paid to duty. In the council chambers, Master Elion and his scribes worked carefully, each quill stroke deliberate. Scrolls and letters were examined, details recorded, and histories preserved. Outside, the river carried reflections of lanterns, clouds, and distant trees, its gentle movement like the whisper of understanding itself. Even the breeze seemed slow and deliberate, stirring leaves with a gentle, rhythmic patience, as though echoing the law's own careful observation. By mid-morning, the city's quiet activity began to resume. Bakers opened shutters, carts moved softly along the streets, and children's laughter drifted over the river. Yet, The rhythm of the day remained deliberate, informed by the patient presence of the law. Small acts of care, repeated consistently over time, were the true foundation of families, estates, and the realm itself, quiet, enduring, and unshakable. Evening fell gently, painting the city in shades of amber and violet. Lanterns flickered along the streets, casting warm, uneven pools of light on the damp cobblestones. The air smelled faintly of smoke and herbs, mingling with the cool river breeze that carried the soft hum of the city, settling into quiet. Each sound the creak of a shutter, the distant bark of a dog. The gentle splash of the river was deliberate, measured, as if time itself had slowed to honor the realm's subtle reckoning. Lady Serene sat by the hearth in her family's great hall, the glow of the fire reflecting in the polished wood and tapestries around her. She held a letter in her hands, recounting the unnoticed efforts of a steward who had spent weeks repairing a crumbling wall, or a distant cousin who had guided travelers safely along dark roads. She traced the words with her fingers, feeling a warmth that was both comforting and profound. The law did not demand grandeur, it honored attentiveness, presence, and patient care repeated over generations. Lord Halver moved through the dimly lit corridors of his estate, reviewing journals and records with calm attention. Even the smallest details mattered. Repaired hinges, mended clothing, advice given discreetly, disputes resolved quietly. These were acts that had preserved his family and its holdings over decades. Slowly, he understood that the law measured the subtle power of vigilance and consistency, rather than the pomp of titles or the drama of public deeds. In the council chambers, Master Elion continued his work with a deliberate slowness, examining letters and scrolls, letting each word settle before moving on. The scribes copied meticulously, their quills scratching softly in rhythm with the quiet city outside. Beyond the windows, the river shimmered under lantern light, carrying reflections of the fading sunset and the soft sway of branches. As night deepened, the city exhaled softly. Families tended hearths, lanterns glimmered in windows, and a gentle calm settled over streets and gardens alike. In this hush, the forgotten law revealed its true nature, not as a force of fear, but as a quiet witness, honoring the steady, careful acts that shaped generations and upheld the realm. Even the smallest deeds, repeated faithfully over time, carried the weight of legacy. The city lay wrapped in deep shadow, pierced only by the soft glow of lanterns that dotted streets, bridges, and courtyards. The river flowed steadily, carrying silver reflections of the moon along its calm surface. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, soft and deliberate, stirring the quiet as if the night itself were listening to the realm's unhurried rhythm. Lady Serene walked through the garden paths, her footsteps light on dukest stone. She paused beneath a flowering arbor, inhaling the scent of night-blooming flowers mingled with the faint tang of wet earth. Each small detail reminded her of the persistent acts of care that had upheld her family and the city through countless years. A wall repaired in secret, a field tended silently, guidance offered to travelers in darkness. These were the deeds the law honored, measured not in grandeur, but in attention, presence, and steady devotion. Lord Halver, in his study, reviewed letters and ledgers by candlelight. The accounts described acts of patient service, stewards guarding estates during long nights, distant relatives maintaining bonds through careful correspondence, small repairs and guidance that had preserved order and safety. He realized the law's weight was gentle yet profound. It valued the constancy and presence of those who acted faithfully, even when no eyes witnessed their care. In the council chamber, Master Elion worked methodically, quills moving slowly across parchment as he recorded every detail. The room was quiet except for the soft scratching of ink and the occasional sigh of settling stone. Outside, the river murmured along its banks, lanterns reflected in the water like flickering stars, and trees whispered softly in the wind. All of it seemed to carry the lesson of the law, that vigilance, patience, and consistency quietly practiced formed the backbone of the realm. By the late hours of the night, the city exhaled a deep calm. Families reflected on the day, estates rested, and the river continued its unhurried journey. In the hush, the law's presence was no longer oppressive, it was a gentle observer, honoring the steady acts of care that created continuity, strength, and legacy across generations. The night deepened into a serene darkness, blanketing the city in a soft hush. Lanterns cast a warm, trembling glow on the streets, their reflections dancing lightly on the river's surface. The air was cool, scented faintly with damp earth and night-blooming flowers. Even the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed to pause, giving space for thought and reflection. Lady Serene wandered slowly along the quiet paths of her estate garden. Each stone and flower was familiar, yet tonight she noticed details she had previously overlooked. The way the dew clung to petals like tiny jewels, the subtle curve of a well-worn bench, the scent of herbs crushed softly underfoot. She felt a gentle calm wash over her, recognizing that the law she had feared was not punitive, but attentive. It honored those who acted with patience, care, and consistent presence, even in the smallest of tasks. Lord Halver moved through his study, the candlelight casting long shadows that seemed to sway with his deliberate movements. Letters lay open on his desk, recounting nights spent tending fires, weeks spent maintaining bridges, months spent guiding travelers and keeping records meticulously. He realized that these modest, continuous acts carried profound weight. The law measured attention and fidelity over time, recognizing the quiet guardians of life and lineage above all else. In the council chambers, Master Elion recorded each observation with painstaking care, quills scratching softly on parchment in harmony with the hushed city outside. Every act, no matter how seemingly small, was given its due. Every detail was noted for the slow, patient judgment of the law. Beyond the windows, the river mirrored lanterns and moonlight alike, its steady flow a silent reminder of continuity and endurance. By the deep hours of night, the city itself seemed to settle into a slow rhythm. Families paused by hearths, lanterns glimmered in windows, and the river carried the reflections of generations past. In this calm, the law revealed its true nature. It was not fearsome or abrupt, but a quiet witness, honoring attentiveness, care, and consistency. Even in shadow, its presence reminded the realm that small, persistent deeds were the foundation of legacy. The moon rose higher, spilling silvery light over rooftops, gardens, and the river, which moved with a soft, unhurried grace. Mist hovered over the water, curling round the banks like gentle fingers, carrying a sense of quiet reflection. The city seemed hushed, wrapped in a stillness that allowed every sound, the whisper of leaves, the distant clink of a lantern, the faint lap of water, to become meaningful. Lady Serene walked along the river's edge, her cloak brushing softly against the dew-laden grass. She paused to watch the moonlight ripple across the water, each movement reminding her of generations long gone, yet still present in the acts they had carried out. Fences repaired, letters sent, fires kept warm, guidance offered without notice. The law, she realized, honored these steady, enduring contributions, measuring constancy and care over spectacle and ceremony. Lord Halver lingered in his library, candlelight casting long, contemplative shadows across walls lined with ledgers and journals. Each record told of someone present when needed, vigilant and patient, upholding the family through quiet, persistent effort. Slowly, he understood that the law's true measure was not grandeur or fame, but the enduring presence of those who acted faithfully, who nurtured, preserved, and protected without expectation of acknowledgement. In the council chamber, Master Elion and the scribes continued their methodical work, quills moving slowly, deliberately. Every entry was examined, every act noted, no matter how seemingly small. Outside, the river reflected lanterns and moonlight alike, its slow motion a silent rhythm echoing the law's patient observation. Even the breeze through the trees seemed to mirror the gentle attentiveness demanded of all who wished to endure through the law's reckoning. By the late hour, the city was quiet in its reflection. Hearths glowed softly in homes, lanterns flickered like watchful eyes, and the river carried the light of memory downstream. In the hush, the forgotten law was no longer an unseen threat, but a gentle observer, honoring the subtle, persistent acts of care that built family, city, and realm over generations. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose, while the city below slowed into a rhythm of calm preparation for night. Lanterns flickered to life along streets and bridges, casting gentle pools of light on cobblestones damp with evening dew. The air carried the faint aroma of smoke, herbs, and fresh bread from bakeries, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves, stirred by a slow, considerate breeze. Lady Serene walked through the garden paths, her hands brushing lightly along hedges and flower beds. She paused to notice the small details. A single rosebud curled tightly against the chill, a tiny patch of moss thriving between stones, the reflection of lantern light dancing on the fountain's water. These quiet moments reminded her that the law valued attention, constancy, and care. Every act, no matter how modest, contributed to the endurance of family and realm, and the law bore witness to all of it with patient awareness. Lord Halver moved through the hallways of his estate, carrying letters and journals. Each one recounted nights spent tending fires, days spent mending fences or guiding travelers, acts of vigilance carried out without expectation of recognition. As he read, a soft understanding settled over him. The law measured presence and dedication more than titles, ceremonies, or grand gestures. The steady, patient work of generations was its true concern. In the council chambers, Master Elion worked under candlelight, quills scratching softly against parchment. Every letter, ledger, and record was examined carefully, with no detail overlooked. The room's quiet was matched by the city outside. The river's surface shimmered in lantern light. Distant footsteps echoed softly along empty streets, and trees whispered in the gentle breeze. All seemed to move in harmony with the law's careful observation, a rhythm both unhurried and deliberate. By evening's end, the city exhaled a quiet, reflective calm. Families gathered around hearths, lanterns glimmered warmly in windows, and the river continued its patient journey. The forgotten law, patient and impartial, had revealed its nature, not as a force of fear, but as a gentle witness, honoring those who acted with care, vigilance, and consistent attention across time. Even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully, held the weight of legacy. Night had deepened into a calm velvet, stretching across the city like a protective cloak. Lanterns glimmered along streets, bridges, and the riverbanks, casting pools of warm light on the cobblestones below. The gentle murmur of the river blended with the soft rustle of leaves, creating a symphony of stillness that seemed to carry the weight of generations. Lady Serene moved slowly through the halls of her estate, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She paused by portraits of ancestors, their eyes seeming to watch the quiet diligence unfolding in the present. each careful act she had read of or witness letters sent. Fences repaired, fires tended, travelers guided decode in her mind like soft whispers through these ancient walls. The law, she realized, observed not only deeds of grandeur, but the persistent, patient attention that sustained families and estates quietly across time. Lord Halver lingered in his library, studying records of service performed in silence, the steward's careful oversight of lands, distant relatives' thoughtful correspondence, small repairs, and decisions that preserved order. Slowly, he began to understand that the law's measure was not spectacle, but presence, consistency, and conscientious effort. Even imperfections mattered, when acknowledged and corrected, because the law valued the effort to maintain continuity and responsibility. In the council chamber, Master Elian worked with deliberate slowness, quills tracing each letter carefully across parchment, preserving both the facts and the rhythm of observation. The scribes followed his movements with quiet attentiveness, ensuring that every detail of service and diligence was recorded. Outside, the river reflected the lanterns and moonlight, its ripples moving like a gentle whisper that mirrored the steady rhythm of the law itself. By the late hour, the city seemed to sigh in quiet reflection. Lanterns flickered in windows, hearths glowed softly, and the night carried a sense of calm reverence. In this stillness, the forgotten law was revealed for what it truly was, a patient, impartial witness to the steady acts of care, vigilance, and attention that formed the foundation of family, city, and realm. Every small deed mattered, each one a thread in the enduring tapestry of legacy. The moon hung high above the city, casting a serene silver light that washed the streets, rooftops, and gardens in quiet brilliance. Shadows stretched lazily across walls and pathways, merging with the soft glow of lanterns to create pools of calm and reflection. The river mirrored the light in slow, deliberate ripples, moving as if to echo the measured patience of the realm itself. Lady Serene sat beneath a flowering arbor in the garden, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders against the cool night air. She traced her fingers over the dew-kissed petals and listened to the gentle trickle of the fountain nearby. Each detail reminded her of countless small acts of care performed over generations. Fences repaired, letters sent, fires tended, travelers guided. These were the deeds that mattered, the acts that the law had always observed and honored. Its gaze was patient and impartial, focused not on grandeur, but on the quiet, persistent diligence that preserved families and estates. Lord Halver, in the glow of his study, reviewed letters and journals recounting similar quiet acts of service, nights spent guarding property, careful attention to estate management, discreet guidance offered to kin far away. He realized that the law's true measure was not in titles or spectacle, but in the repeated presence and vigilance of those who acted faithfully. Even small mistakes, when recognized and corrected, carried weight because they reflected conscious care and responsibility. In the council chambers, Master Elian and his scribes continued their meticulous work by candlelight. Each quill stroke was slow and deliberate, every detail recorded with precision. Outside, the river rippled softly, leaves whispered in the gentle breeze, and lanterns reflected like tiny stars along the streets. Everything moved with a quiet, reflective rhythm, mirroring the law's patient observation. By the depth of night, the city exhaled a calm, deliberate hush. Families tended their hearths, lanterns glimmered softly in windows, and the river carried the moon's silver light through the quiet streets. In this stillness, the forgotten law showed its true purpose, to honor the steady, faithful acts of care and attentiveness that form the foundation of enduring legacy, revealing that even the smallest deeds, done with care, hold immense power over time. The city rested under a blanket of night, the sky deep and still, pierced only by the soft gleam of stars. Lanterns glowed faintly along streets and bridges, casting gentle pools of light on wet cobblestones. The river moved slowly, its surface catching the reflections of lanterns and moonlight in a calm, rippling dance. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the soft creak of a shutter, was deliberate, measured, as if the night itself was attentive to the quiet rhythm of the realm. Lady Serene wandered along the garden paths, her hands brushing against the leaves and blossoms of carefully tended plants. She paused beside the fountain, listening to the water trickle softly over the stone, each droplet a reminder of the patience and consistency that sustained her family over generations. She thought of small deeds, mended fences, letters sent to distant kin, discreet guidance to travelers, quiet care for the sick. These acts, often unseen and unheralded, were exactly the kind the law observed and valued. Lord Halver moved slowly through the corridors of his estate, reviewing journals and ledgers by candlelight. Each entry recounted nights spent guarding property, days devoted to maintenance, letters sent to ensure the safety and well-being of distant relatives. He felt a deep understanding settle over him. The law did not measure grand gestures or titles, but the faithful presence and steady diligence of those who acted with care. Even errors held meaning when met with recognition and correction, for the law rewarded vigilance and attentiveness. Above all, in the council chambers, Master Elian worked with meticulous patience, quills scratching softly on parchment as scribes copied each word. Every detail, however small, was recorded with reverence. Outside, the river flowed with gentle constancy, leaves whispered in the breeze, and the city moved with a quiet, reflective rhythm. All of it mirrored the law's attentive gaze, a reminder that continuity and care were the true measures of legacy. By the late hours, the city seemed to exhale a soft, measured calm. Lanterns flickered in windows, hearths glowed warmly, and the river carried reflections of moonlight downstream. In this gentle hush, the forgotten law revealed its purpose: to witness, honor, and affirm the steady, patient acts of attention and care that sustain families, communities, and the realm itself. Even the smallest deeds, repeated faithfully, bore the weight of history. The night was deep and still, wrapping the city in a soft velvet of calm. Lanterns glimmered faintly along streets and bridges, casting pools of warm light across cobblestones darkened by evening dew. The river reflected the moon and scattered lanterns like threads of silver, moving with deliberate patience. Even the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional distant footsteps seemed to carry weight in the hush, a reminder that the city itself was attentive to the quiet rhythm of life. Lady Serene strolled through her garden, the scent of night-blooming flowers mingling with the cool, earthy air. She paused to watch the fountain ripple gently, each droplet tumbling with deliberate, patient repetition. Thoughts of her ancestors drifted to her, of the countless small acts that had upheld the family over generations, mending fences, tending fires, offering guidance to travelers, writing letters to distant kin. These were not grand deeds, but they were the ones the law measured, recognizing constancy, care, and presence over ceremony or titles. Lord Halver lingered in his library, reviewing letters and journals by candlelight. The accounts described nights spent overseeing estates, days spent repairing bridges, months of careful guidance offered quietly. He realized that these small, consistent actions formed the backbone of the family's enduring strength. The law, he understood now, valued patience and vigilance, the steady repetition of attentive deeds, even when unseen by others. Mistakes, too, mattered only insofar as they were met with mindfulness and correction. In the council chambers, Master Elion and his scribes worked slowly, deliberately, quills tracing words across parchment in careful rhythm. Each record, no matter how minor it seemed, was preserved for the law's patient judgment. Outside, the river whispered over its banks, leaves shivered softly in the breeze, and lantern light flickered in quiet reflection. The city moved in gentle cadence, mirroring the steady watchfulness demanded by the law. By the deep night, the city exhaled a hushed serenity. Hearths glowed softly, lanterns shimmered in windows, and the river carried the reflections of moonlight onward. In this quiet, the forgotten law revealed itself, not as a blade of fear, but as a gentle observer, honoring those who acted with care, attention, and steadfast presence. Even the smallest, most consistent deeds carried profound significance, shaping the legacy of families and the realm alike. The late-night air was cool and still, holding the city in a hush that felt sacred. Lanterns flickered softly, casting pools of warm light that danced across cobblestones and the calm river. The trees whispered faintly in the breeze, and the occasional clink of a shutter or distant hoofbeat was swallowed by the gentle rhythm of the night. Everything seemed to move with deliberation, as though the city itself had learned patience from the law's patient gaze. Lady Serene sat by a small table in her study, candlelight reflecting on the polished wood and casting soft shadows that danced on the walls. She traced her fingers along letters recounting quiet acts of service, a wall repaired under the cover of night, a fire stoked for travelers passing through, guidance offered to a worried neighbor. Each act, simple and consistent, resonated deeply with her. She realized the law did not demand spectacle or power, but attentive presence, patience, and quiet vigilance across generations. Lord Halver moved through the corridors of his estate with careful steps, carrying journals and ledgers. The accounts detailed nights spent tending livestock, weeks repairing bridges, months of correspondence preserving distant family ties. He felt a soft certainty settle over him. The law measured constancy, attentiveness, and care, rewarding those who acted faithfully over time, even when unnoticed. Small mistakes mattered only when recognized and corrected, for the law honored steady, thoughtful effort above all else. In the council chambers, Master Elion and his scribes continued their deliberate work, quills scratching softly across parchment. Every detail, no matter how minor, was noted with care. Outside, the river reflected the lantern's warm glow, and leaves whispered softly in the night breeze. Everything moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though the city itself had learned to align with the law's patient watchfulness. By the late hour, the city exhaled a quiet, reflective calm. Hearths glowed warmly, lanterns shimmered in windows, and the river carried the moonlight onward. The forgotten law, though once feared, now revealed itself as a gentle witness, honoring the steadfast acts of care, attention, and vigilance that sustained families, communities, and the realm itself. Even the smallest, most consistent deeds bore the weight of enduring legacy. The city rested beneath a deep, indigo sky, the stars glimmering softly like distant lanterns scattered across the heavens. Lanterns along streets and bridges glowed faintly, casting gentle pools of light on cobblestones still damp from the night's dew. The river flowed silently, its surface reflecting moonlight and lanterns alike, moving with a deliberate, unhurried grace. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, a faint animal stir, the distant clink of a shutter was measured, reverent, as though the night itself had become an attentive witness. Lady Serene walked quietly along the garden paths, her cloak brushing softly against the dew-laden grass. She paused beneath the arch of a flowering arbor, inhaling the fragrance of night-blooming flowers mingled with the earthy scent of damp soil. Her thoughts turned to the persistent acts of service that had upheld her family over generations. Mended gates, fires stoked in cold nights, guidance offered to travelers, letters sent to preserve distant bonds. She realized the law observed these acts not as punishment, but as recognition, honoring the steady diligence that ensured continuity and care. Lord Helver lingered in his library, poring over journals and ledgers illuminated by candlelight. The records spoke of quiet vigilance, nights spent guarding estates, careful maintenance of fields and bridges, correspondence offering guidance to distant relatives. Slowly, he understood the law's true measure, not titles, pomp, or public ceremony, but the repeated presence, patience, and attention that nurtured and protected families over time. Mistakes, he realized, mattered only when acknowledged and corrected, as part of consistent care. In the council chamber, Master Elian worked with deliberate patience, quill moving rhythmically across parchment as scribes copied every detail. Each letter, every record of service, was preserved for the law's careful observation. Outside, the river whispered along its banks, leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and lanterns flickered like watchful eyes across the city. All moved with quiet deliberation, echoing the law's gentle vigilance. By midnight, the city exhaled, a calm, steady hush. Hearths glowed warmly, lanterns shimmered in windows, and the river carried the moonlight slowly downstream. In this stillness, the forgotten law revealed its true purpose, a silent observer, honoring every attentive, consistent act of care, and showing that even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully, carried the weight of history and the power to preserve legacy. The city lay draped in a serene darkness, the sky a deep velvet sprinkled with faint stars. Lanterns flickered gently along streets and bridges, their warm light reflecting softly in the calm river. The occasional rustle of leaves, the quiet sigh of a distant shutter, and the gentle ripple of water created a symphony of stillness that seemed to hold the weight of generations in its deliberate rhythm. Lady Serene walked slowly along the garden paths of her estate, each step muffled by the soft earth beneath her feet. She paused beneath the arch of a wisteria vine, inhaling the scent of blossoms mixed with cool night air. Her thoughts turned to the countless small acts that had sustained her family. Mended fences, fires stoked for warmth, letters sent to distant relatives, guidance offered to travelers in need. These acts, though quiet and often unseen, were the very deeds the law honored. Its measure was patience, attentiveness, and the steady diligence of those who preserved life and legacy over time. Lord Halver lingered in his study, the flickering candlelight revealing ledgers and journals filled with accounts of careful stewardship. Nights spent guarding the estates, days devoted to repair and maintenance, months spent writing letters to distant kin. He felt a deep calm settle within him as he realized the law's true concern was constancy, presence, and mindful action. Even mistakes had significance if they were met with acknowledgement and correction. For the law valued the persistence and care that had held the family through years of quiet diligence. In the council chambers, Master Elion worked with slow deliberation, quills moving softly across parchment while scribes copied every word with care. Each record, no matter how small, was preserved for the law's patient gaze. Outside, the river flowed steadily, trees whispered in the breeze, and lanterns reflected like gentle stars along quiet streets. Everything moved in rhythm with the law's gentle observation, reminding the city that attentive action, repeated over time, was the truest measure of legacy. By the deep hours of night, the city exhaled a hush of reflection. Lanterns glimmered in windows, hearths glowed warmly, and the river carried moonlight along its patient course. The forgotten law, though long overlooked, now revealed itself as a calm, impartial witness, honoring the steady, faithful acts of care and vigilance that sustained families, estates, and the realm itself. Even the smallest, quietest deeds held the enduring power of history. The city rested beneath a night sky, softened by a gentle haze, stars faintly gleaming above the rooftops. Lanterns glimmered along streets and bridges, their golden light reflecting softly in the river, which moved with slow, patient grace. The occasional rustle of leaves or the quiet creak of a shutter reminded the city that even in stillness, life continued with deliberate care. Lady Serene wandered through the quiet gardens of her estate, the scent of wet earth and night-blooming flowers rising softly with each step. She paused by the fountain, watching the water ripple and fold over itself with patient rhythm. Thoughts of her ancestors came unbidden hands that repaired walls, guided travelers, tended fires, wrote letters with care. Each act, seemingly small and unnoticed, had shaped the family's enduring presence. She understood now that the law measured attentiveness, constancy, and quiet diligence above all, honoring those who had sustained life through persistent care. Lord Halver moved slowly through his study, reading letters and journals illuminated by candlelight. The records described nights spent guarding estates, weeks spent repairing bridges, and months of correspondence preserving distant family ties. He felt a sense of calm certainty. The law valued presence, steady vigilance, and thoughtful attention. Even minor mistakes mattered only when recognized and corrected. For the law's measure was patience, care, and consistency repeated across time. In the council chamber, Master Elion worked with deliberate slowness, quill gliding across parchment as scribes copied each detail with care. Every act of service, no matter how small, was preserved for the law's watchful observation. Outside, the river whispered along its banks, lanterns reflected like soft stars, and the wind rustled leaves with quiet intention. The city moved in harmony with the law's rhythm, understanding that attentive deeds, repeated faithfully, formed the backbone of legacy. By midnight, the city exhaled a gentle hush. Lanterns shimmered in windows, hearths glowed warmly, and the river carried the moon's silver light downstream. The forgotten law, once feared, now revealed itself as a patient witness, honoring the steady acts of care and vigilance that had quietly preserved families, communities, and the realm itself. Even the smallest deeds, faithfully done, held enduring power and significance. The night had settled into its deepest silence. The sky a profound shade of indigo dotted with faint, distant stars. Lanterns glowed softly along the streets and bridges, their warm light mirrored by the river's slow, reflective current. The air was cool, carrying the subtle scent of damp earth and night-blooming flora. Every sound, the soft ripple of water, the whisper of leaves, the occasional distant footstep, was gentle, deliberate, part of the city's slow, attentive rhythm. Lady Serene walked quietly through her garden, her hands brushing along the cool leaves and delicate petals. She paused beneath an arching vine, listening to the fountain's gentle trickle and inhaling the night air. Memories of past generations filled her thoughts, the quiet work of hands that repaired walls, stoked fires, guided travelers, and preserved letters of kin. These acts, often overlooked by the world, were the very deeds the law observed and honored. Its measure lay in patience, attentiveness, and consistency over time, not spectacle or acclaim. Lord Halver lingered in his study, candlelight illuminating letters and journals that recounted the faithful efforts of family and stewards alike. Nights spent guarding estates, days devoted to repairs, months spent nurturing distant family ties all contributed to the steady rhythm of duty. He understood now that the law measured presence, vigilance, and dedication, recognizing that even small, persistent actions formed the foundation of enduring legacy. Mistakes mattered only when met with awareness and correction, reflecting the careful attention the law valued above all. In the council chamber, Master Elion worked with deliberate slowness, quill scratching softly as scribes copied every word with careful precision. Each detail, each record of service, was preserved for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river flowed steadily, trees whispered in the breeze, and lanterns glimmered like gentle, watchful eyes across the quiet city. All moved in harmony with the law's steady rhythm, echoing the truth that attentive, consistent deeds were the backbone of families, estates, and the realm. By the late-night hour, the city exhaled a deep, reflective calm. Hearths glowed softly, lanterns shimmered in windows, and the river carried the moonlight downstream in slow, measured waves. The forgotten law revealed itself fully, not as a force of fear, but as a patient, impartial witness, honoring every steady act of care, vigilance, and attentiveness. Even the smallest deeds, repeated with constancy, held the enduring power to preserve legacy. Even before the first light of dawn, the city seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in the quiet hush that stretches between night and morning. Lanterns glimmered faintly along streets and bridges, their soft golden glow mirrored by the gentle ripples of the river. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint aroma of dew on stone and the earthy scent of gardens settling into the new day. Every movement, the stir of leaves, the faint ripple of water, the distant steps of a night watchman felt deliberate, measured, part of the world's quiet preparation. Lady Serene wandered through the estate gardens, her cloak brushing against the Dulladen grass. She paused by the fountain, watching water tumble slowly over its stone lip. Her thoughts turned to the subtle, persistent deeds that had preserved her family through generations. Fences repaired in silence, fires tended through long nights, letters sent to distant kin, guidance offered quietly. These were not acts of grandeur, yet they carried the weight of the law, which measured consistency, attentiveness, and presence over spectacle. Lord Halver, seated at his desk, reviewed letters and journals by candlelight. Each recounted nights spent guarding the estate, days spent overseeing repairs, months spent preserving connections with distant relatives. Slowly, a deep calm settled over him. The law did not judge by titles, ceremonies, or public recognition. Its focus was steadfast attention and faithful action over time. Even minor errors mattered only when acknowledged and corrected, for such mindfulness reflected true care. In the council chambers, Master Elion worked deliberately, quill gliding softly across parchment while scribes copied each detail with care. Every act, no matter how small, was recorded for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river shimmered in lantern light. The breeze whispered through trees, and the city moved with quiet intention. All of it mirrored the law's unhurried, watchful presence, a reminder that attentive, consistent deeds are the foundation of enduring legacy. As the horizon began to pale with the first hints of morning, the city exhaled a gentle, reflective calm. Lanterns flickered in windows, hearths glowed softly, and the river carried the silver light of dawn in its slow, steady flow. The forgotten law, once feared, now revealed itself as a patient observer, honoring the careful, persistent acts that sustained families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully over time, bore the weight of history and continuity. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the city, brushing the rooftops and riverbanks with soft hues of pink and gold. Lanterns, now dim in the growing light, flickered gently before fading entirely, leaving the city bathed in a soft, awakening glow. The river mirrored the sky's pastel shades, its surface smooth and reflective, carrying the quiet rhythm of the early morning. Even the breeze moved gently, stirring leaves with measured care, as if the world itself were mindful of the day's beginning. Lady Serene stood at the edge of the garden, wrapped in her cloak, watching the transformation of night into day. The flowers glistened with dew, and the air was fragrant with earth and blooms. She reflected on the persistence of generations past, hands that repaired walls, tended fires, guided travelers, and wrote letters to distant kin. These quiet, often unnoticed acts formed the foundation of her family's strength, the small, faithful attentions that the forgotten lord cherished above all else. Lord Halver moved through his study, reviewing journals and letters as the sunlight spilled across his desk. Each record told stories of patience and care, stewards watching over the estate, bridges repaired, letters preserving bonds with faraway family. A calm understanding settled within him. The law measured steady presence, diligence, and attentiveness, acts repeated faithfully over time. Mistakes mattered only when met with recognition and careful correction, for the law honored mindful action above all. In the council chambers, Master Elion and the scribes continued their deliberate work, quills gliding softly over parchment. Each note of service, no matter how small, was preserved for the law's attentive judgment. Outside, the river reflected the early light of day. Trees whispered in the breeze, and the city moved with gentle purpose. Every movement, every act, aligned with the law's measured observation. A reminder that constancy and care formed the backbone of lasting legacy. By the time the sun fully rose, the city exhaled a quiet, steady calm. Hearths glowed in the soft morning light. Streets stirred with gentle activity, and the river carried the reflections of day and sky onward. The forgotten law, patient and impartial, remained a witness to all, honoring the faithful, quiet acts of care and vigilance that had preserved families, estates, and the realm through the slow passage of time. Even the smallest deeds, done consistently, held the enduring power to shape history. The city basked in the soft warmth of morning light, the sky painted with gentle shades of gold and rose. Lanterns, now unlit, cast no shadows, allowing the river to shimmer freely in the sun's first rays. The air was crisp and sweet, with the scent of dew-soaked earth and early blossoms, carrying a quiet promise of a day yet to unfold. Even the faint rustle of leaves and the distant clatter of morning activity felt deliberate, measured, as though the city itself had learned to move with patient intention. Lady Serene walked slowly through the garden, her fingers brushing over leaves, still glistening with dew. The fountain's water gleamed in the morning light, and the flowers seemed to nod in gentle acknowledgement of her presence. Her thoughts wandered to the quiet labor of past generations. Walls mended, fires tended, travelers guided safely through dark roads, letters sent to distant kin. These small acts, often unnoticed, formed the foundation of her family's endurance. She understood now that the law honored such constancy, vigilance, and faithful attention more than any public display or title. Lord Halver moved through his study, reading journals and letters bathed in sunlight. The entries described nights spent guarding estates, days spent mending bridges, months of correspondence ensuring bonds with distant relatives. Slowly, he felt the law's true measure settle in his understanding. presence, patience, and mindful action mattered most. Even minor mistakes gained significance only when met with recognition and correction, reflecting the care and dedication the law valued above all. In the council chambers, Master Elion and his scribes worked deliberately, quills tracing each word with soft precision across parchment. Every act, no matter how small, was recorded for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river glimmered in the morning light, trees whispered softly in the breeze, and the city moved in gentle rhythm. The quiet diligence of all who lived within it mirrored the law's vigilant, patient presence, reminding every household that attentive, repeated care was the true foundation of legacy. By mid-morning, the city exhaled a sense of serene purpose. Hearths glowed warmly in kitchens, the river carried reflections of sky and light onward, and the streets began to stir with measured activity. The forgotten law, steadfast and impartial, remained a quiet witness, honoring every act of care, vigilance, and consistent attention that had preserved families, estates, and the realm across generations. Even the smallest deeds, faithfully performed, held the enduring weight of history. The morning unfolded slowly, golden light spilling across the city and shimmering along the river. Lanterns, now unlit, left the streets bathed in the gentle warmth of dawn. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, herbs, and fresh bread, mingling with the soft, earthy scent of gardens. The city moved with careful deliberation. Carts creaked along streets, doors opened with gentle ease, and the occasional footstep echoed softly against cobblestone, each sound a note in the quiet rhythm of life. Lady Serene wandered through the garden paths, her fingers tracing the edges of dew-dappled leaves. She paused beside the fountain, listening to the water trickle over stone in soothing repetition. Thoughts of her family's quiet labor drifted through her mind, walls repaired in secrecy, fires tended during long nights, guidance offered to travelers without expectation, letters sent to distant kin to maintain bonds. These acts, seemingly small, were the ones the law valued most: attentive, persistent, and faithful to the task at hand. Lord Halver, seated in his study, reviewed journals and letters by the light of the morning sun. Accounts of diligent service filled the pages, stewards safeguarding estates, bridges repaired, correspondence preserving distant connections. Slowly, he recognized the law's true focus: steady presence, mindful attention, and repeated care. Even small errors gained meaning when met with correction, for the law honored continuous, conscientious effort over time. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes moved with measured precision, quills gliding softly across parchment. Every record, no matter how minor, was preserved for the law's attentive judgment. Outside, the river carried the reflections of sunlight, trees whispered in the breeze, and the city followed the gentle cadence of the morning. Each household, each act of care, contributed to the steady rhythm of life, mirrored by the patient gaze of the law. By late morning, the city exhaled a calm, deliberate hum. Hearths glowed softly in kitchens, the river shimmered with gentle motion, and the streets stirred with quiet, purposeful activity. The forgotten law, impartial and patient, remained a steadfast witness, honoring every consistent, attentive act that sustained families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully, held the enduring power to shape legacy across generations. The sun climbed higher, casting soft, golden light across rooftops, gardens, and the slow-moving river. Shadows lengthened gently and shifted with the day's progression, while a mild breeze carried the scent of fresh bread, blooming herbs, and warm stone. The city moved with measured care, Carts rolled steadily along streets, the occasional footstep echoed softly, and birds called to one another from trees, all blending into the tranquil rhythm of midday life. Lady Serene lingered in her garden, seated on a stone bench beneath the shade of a flowering arbor. She let her fingers drift over dew-flecked petals and watched the fountain's water sparkle in the sun. Her thoughts wandered to the quiet, persistent labor of generations past. Fences repaired in secrecy, fires tended long into the night, guidance given to travelers without fanfare, and letters sent to preserve connections with faraway kin. These simple, faithful acts were the ones the law revered, small, consistent deeds that carried weight across time and sustained families and the realm. Lord Halver moved through his study, reading letters and journals that described diligent service carried out in silence, nights spent guarding the estate, bridges repaired with patient care, months devoted to maintaining distant bonds. Slowly, he understood the law's true concern. It did not measure titles, pageantry, or recognition, but the steady, attentive presence of those who acted faithfully over time. Even small mistakes were significant only when recognized and corrected, revealing the thoughtful attention the law rewarded. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes worked with deliberate care, quills tracing each word with slow precision. Every act of service, no matter how minor, was preserved in records for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river reflected sunlight, trees rustled softly in the midday breeze, and the city moved with quiet, purposeful rhythm. Every household, every act of care, contributed to the city's gentle cadence, mirrored by the law's watchful presence. By midday, the city exuded a calm, reflective energy. Hearths glowed in kitchens, the river shimmered with soft motion, and streets hummed with gentle activity. The forgotten law, patient and impartial, remained a witness to all, honoring every attentive, consistent act that nurtured families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, faithfully repeated, bore enduring significance and shaped the legacy of generations. The sun hung high, casting a warm golden glow across the city. Shadows stretched lazily across cobblestones and rooftops, blending with the soft shimmer of the river. The air carried the faint sense of baked bread, herbs, and sun-warmed stone, creating a sense of quiet comfort. The city moved with a deliberate, gentle pace. Carts rolled steadily along streets. The soft murmur of voices floated on the breeze, and leaves rustled lightly in the afternoon wind, each sound blending seamlessly into the calm rhythm of daily life. Lady Serene strolled through the garden, her fingers brushing against flowers glistening with dew that had lingered from the morning. She paused by the fountain, watching water spill gracefully over stone and listening to its soothing trickle. Her mind wandered to the quiet labors of ancestors, walls repaired under moonlight, fires tended without notice, travelers guided safely along darkened paths, letters sent to maintain connections with distant kin. These were the acts the law truly valued faithful, consistent care that quietly upheld families and estates across generations. Lord Halver lingered in his study, examining letters and journals that recorded the diligence of family and stewards alike. Nights spent guarding the estate, days devoted to repairs, and months of careful correspondence all reflected the persistent vigilance the law honored. He realized the law's measure was not in titles, ceremony, or public recognition, but in presence, patience, and thoughtful, repeated action. Mistakes gained meaning only when addressed with care, showing attentiveness and commitment to enduring responsibility. In the council chambers, Master Elion and his scribes continued their work with methodical precision, quills gliding across parchment, preserving every detail for the Lord's patient gaze. Outside, the river reflected the sunlight in soft, rippling patterns, and the trees whispered with the gentle breeze. The city moved with steady, measured intention, its rhythm echoing the law's quiet observation and reminding all who lived within its walls that thoughtful diligence was the foundation of lasting legacy. By mid-afternoon, the city exhaled a calm, measured serenity. Hearths glowed in kitchens, the river carried sunlight across its surface, and the streets flowed with deliberate, purposeful activity. The forgotten law, impartial and patient, remained a silent witness, honoring each consistent, attentive act that preserved families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully, bore the enduring weight of history and the strength of legacy. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a gentle amber glow over the city. Shadows lengthened across rooftops, bridges, and the river, while the air carried a faint warmth mingled with the scent of herbs, fresh bread, and sun-warmed stone. Every sound, the soft clatter of carts, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of conversation, blended seamlessly into the city's unhurried rhythm, creating a quiet symphony of afternoon life. Lady Serene walked slowly through the gardens, her fingertips brushing the petals of late-blooming flowers. She paused by the fountain, watching the water ripple and sparkle in the soft sunlight. Memories of her ancestors drifted through her thoughts. Walls quietly repaired, fires tended during long nights, guidance offered to travelers without expectation, letters sent to preserve distant bonds. These acts, unremarkable to the casual observer, were the ones the law honored, consistent, attentive, and patient deeds that carried the weight of generations. Lord Halver lingered in his study, reviewing letters and journals illuminated by the golden light. Records detailed nights spent guarding estates, bridges repaired with meticulous care, months spent nurturing distant family ties. He felt a deep understanding settle over him. The law measured faithful presence, patient attention, and deliberate action over time. Even small mistakes mattered only when acknowledged and corrected, reflecting the care and conscientiousness the law demanded. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes worked methodically, quills gliding softly over parchment. Every act, no matter how minor, was recorded for the law's watchful observation. Outside, the river shimmered in the sunlight, trees whispered in the breeze, and the city moved with deliberate, gentle purpose. Each household, each action, contributed to the steady rhythm that mirrored the law's patient presence, a constant reminder that attentive, repeated care was the foundation of enduring legacy. As afternoon gave way to the early hints of evening, the city exhaled a soft, reflective calm. Lanterns began to glow faintly along streets, hearths shimmered with warmth, and the river carried the sunlight's fading glow downstream. The forgotten law, steadfast and impartial, remained a quiet witness, honoring the consistent, diligent acts that preserved families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, faithfully executed, held the enduring power to shape history and sustain legacy. The sun dipped lower, painting the city in soft amber and gold, while shadows stretched lazily across streets, rooftops, and the gentle curve of the river. Lanterns, now unlit, reflected faintly in the water, and the air carried the mingled scent of herbs, warm stone, and lingering bread from bakeries. Every sound, the whisper of leaves in the breeze, the distant clatter of a cart, the soft murmur of voices moved with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm, as though the city itself were aware of the quiet passage of time. Lady Serene walked slowly through the garden, her fingers brushing over dew-flecked petals, lingering on the tender curve of each flower. She paused by the fountain, watching water spill and fold over stone in a soothing, endless rhythm. Her thoughts wandered to the small, faithful deeds of ancestors. Walls repaired under moonlight, fires tended in the deep of night, guidance given to travelers without fanfare, letters sent to maintain distant connections. These unassuming acts were the law's true measure, honoring patience, diligence, and consistent care above all else. Lord Halver moved through his study, reviewing letters and journals by the soft glow of the sinking sun. Entries described quiet stewardship, nights spent guarding estates, days devoted to repairing bridges, months of correspondence maintaining bonds across the realm. He felt a gentle certainty settle within him. The law measured steady attention, faithful presence, and mindful action repeated over time. Mistakes mattered only when acknowledged and corrected, demonstrating the thoughtful diligence that the law valued most. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes continued their methodical work, quills gliding carefully across parchment. Each note of service, each detail, was preserved for the law's watchful gaze. Outside, the river shimmered with fading sunlight, trees whispered softly in the gentle evening breeze, and the city moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. Every household, every act of attention, contributed to the steady rhythm of life, echoing the law's patient observation. As day slowly yielded to evening, the city exhaled a quiet, reflective calm. Lanterns began to glow along streets and bridges, hearths shimmered warmly, and the river carried the sun's fading light downstream. The forgotten law, steadfast and impartial, remained a gentle witness, honoring every act of care, vigilance, and attentive presence that had quietly sustained families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, performed faithfully, carried the enduring weight of legacy. The sky deepened into shades of violet and indigo as evening settled over the city. Lanterns flickered to life along streets and bridges, casting warm, golden pools of light on cobblestones and the gentle ripples of the river. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the scents of night-blooming flowers, herbs, and wood smoke from hearths. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the soft clink of a shutter was delicate, as if the city itself moved in mindful harmony with the slow rhythm of nightfall. Lady Serene wandered through the gardens, her steps soft against dew-laden grass. She paused beside the fountain, watching water tumble over stone in patient, measured ripples. Thoughts of generations past came to her, walls quietly repaired, fires tended through long nights, travelers guided safely along shadowed roads, letters sent to preserve distant bonds. These acts, though small and often unnoticed, formed the very foundation of her family's strength. The law, she reflected, observed not only grand deeds but the faithful attention, care, and vigilance repeated steadily over time. Lord Halver lingered in his study, candlelight flickering across letters and journals, recounting quiet acts of service, nights spent guarding estates, careful repairs, and correspondence maintaining distant connections. All testified to steady presence and patience. Slowly, he understood the law's true measure. It valued continuity, attentiveness, and mindful action more than public ceremony or titles. Mistakes mattered only when addressed thoughtfully, reflecting the law's preference for care and perseverance over perfection. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes continued their deliberate work, quills gliding across parchment in slow, precise motions. Every detail, every act, was preserved for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river reflected lantern light, trees whispered in the gentle evening breeze, and the city moved with calm, measured purpose. Each household, each attentive act, contributed to the rhythm that mirrored the law's steady presence. As night deepened, the city exhaled a soft, reflective calm. Lanterns shimmered in windows, hearths glowed warmly, and the river carried the lantern's light in slow, deliberate ripples. The forgotten law, impartial and vigilant, remained a quiet witness, honoring each faithful act of care, vigilance, and presence that preserved families, estates, and the realm. Even the smallest deeds, repeated with constancy, held the enduring power to shape history and sustain legacy. The night had fully settled over the city, wrapping it in a quiet, velvety hush. Stars twinkled faintly above, soft points of silver in the deep indigo sky. Lanterns glimmered along streets, bridges, and the riverbank, their warm light reflected in the gentle ripples of the water. The air was cool and still, carrying the subtle scent of night-blooming flowers, wood smoke, and damp stone. Every sound, the whisper of leaves, the distant clatter of a shutter, the soft lapping of the river, was deliberate, as if the city itself moved with mindful attention. Lady Serene walked slowly through the garden paths, her cloak brushing softly against the dew-laden grass. She paused at the fountain, watching the water ripple endlessly, each movement patient and calm. Memories of her ancestors rose unbidden, walls repaired quietly, fires tended through long nights, travelers guided with discretion, letters sent to preserve bonds across distance. These small, steadfast acts were the ones the law honored most faithful, attentive, repeated across time, quietly sustaining families and estates. Lord Halver lingered in his study, candlelight illuminating letters and journals recounting quiet diligence, nights spent guarding estates, careful repairs, and months of correspondence preserving distant kin spoke of steady presence and careful attention. He understood now that the law's measure lay not in pomp or public acclaim, but in patience, vigilance, and the persistence of thoughtful action. Even minor mistakes held significance when addressed with care, showing the continuous dedication that the law valued above all. In the council chamber, Master Elion and his scribes worked with deliberate slowness, quills tracing words across parchment with meticulous care. Every detail, every recorded act of service was preserved for the law's patient observation. Outside, the river shimmered in lantern light, trees whispered softly in the evening breeze, and the city moved with quiet, measured purpose. Each household, each attentive deed contributed to the city's rhythm, reflecting the law's steady, impartial vigilance. By the late hour, the city exhaled a gentle, reflective calm. Lanterns glimmered in windows, hearths glowed softly, and the river carried the light of lanterns and stars in slow, soothing ripples. The forgotten law, steadfast and impartial, remained a silent witness, honoring every careful, faithful act that preserved families, estates, and the realm itself. Even the smallest deeds, performed consistently, bore the enduring weight of history and the strength of legacy. Night lay thick and serene over the city, a deep indigo sky sprinkled with faint stars, stretching endlessly above. Lanterns glimmered softly along the streets, bridges, and riverbanks, casting warm pools of light that danced gently on the cobblestones and the rippling water. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying hints of night-blooming flowers, damp earth, and the faint scent of wood smoke. The city moved with deliberate, hushed rhythm. A leaf rustled, a distant shutter clicked softly, and the river murmured along its steady course, each sound blending seamlessly into the quiet symphony of night. Lady Serene wandered slowly through the gardens one final time, her hands brushing over dew-dappled petals. She paused at the fountain, listening to the water's soothing rhythm, feeling the weight of generations in each gentle ripple. She thought of ancestors who had labored quietly, walls repaired under moonlight, fires tended through the night, travelers guided safely along shadowed paths, letters written to maintain bonds across distances. These small, faithful acts, often unnoticed, yet persistent, formed the foundation of her family's enduring strength. The law, impartial and patient, honored precisely these steady, careful deeds. Lord Halver lingered in his study, reviewing journals and letters by the soft candlelight. Nights spent guarding estates, careful repairs, months of correspondence preserving distant family ties, all spoke of mindful presence, patience, and faithful dedication. He realized that the law measured constancy, vigilance, and attention more than ceremony, recognition, or rank. Mistakes mattered only when met with awareness and correction, revealing the deliberate care that the law valued above all. Master Elian, in the council chamber, worked with quiet focus alongside his scribes, quills tracing each word with care. Every record, no matter how small, was preserved for the law's observant gaze. Outside, the river glimmered with lantern and star reflections. Trees whispered softly in the gentle night breeze, and the city moved with calm, deliberate purpose. Each attentive act, repeated faithfully, contributed to the steady rhythm of life that the law quietly witnessed and honored. As the night reached its deepest hour, the city exhaled a soft, serene hush. Hearths glowed warmly, lanterns shimmered in windows, and the river carried the gentle light of night onward. The forgotten law, steadfast, impartial, and patient, remained a silent observer, honoring every act of care, vigilance, and faithful attention that had preserved families, estates, and the realm itself. Even the smallest deeds, performed consistently over time, held the enduring power to shape legacy and history. The night whispered its final lessons, that patience, attention, and steady care are the quiet threads that bind generations, and that even in seeming obscurity, faithful acts carry immeasurable weight. Thank you for joining this journey through the city and the lives of those who lived under the watchful eye of the forgotten law. Let your mind rest now, carrying the gentle rhythm of their diligence, patience, and care as you drift into calm sleep. Remember, small, thoughtful acts matter, and even the quietest efforts can shape history in profound ways. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and comment. Share your thoughts, your favorite moments, or simply say hello. To those watching from the US, Europe, Canada, or anywhere else at this quiet hour, may the calm of this tale carry you gently toward rest. Sleep well, and may tomorrow greet you with gentle light and quiet purpose.